Hello, everybody. Welcome back to A Slightly Twisted Female. I'm your host, Brittany RouXX. I am so excited to welcome today's guest, Jonathan K. Uhler, John K. Uhler. He has a lifetime of clinical experience working with male sex offenders in prison populations, and I think perhaps outpatient and a variety of other environments. And I'll let him tell us more about that. But we've been talking a lot about sort of the current events of the gender critical movement and the men at the center of the controversy. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation and picking John's brain about his experience through his clinical practice and how that sort of applies to, what we're all dealing with in these conversations in the gender critical space. So John, welcome. And thank you so much for being here.
Brittany, it's a pleasure. I'm happy to be with you.
Yeah, I'm so looking forward to it. So tell us a little bit about your background. What is your experience, and what led you to that, and what led you from that experience to your interest in taking on this gender critical topic?
That's right, like you or anyone. Why do we do this? Because we're not going to get accolades, right? We're stepping into a minefield. I've been a therapist for 30 years, actually a little over 30 years now. My primary population, as far as what I have focused on, is really two populations. At least that was by choice, although the other, I guess, is by choice as well. First is survivors of sexual abuse, so severe or complex trauma. If I was to go on for a PhD, although I taught with Geneva College on an adjunct basis for 8 years, so we get you and I, Brittany, and others that venture into these waters. They'll throw the kitchen sink at us to try to minimize or downplay anything. And they will continue to say that, those in academia, I've been in academia. All that to say, if I was to go on for a PhD, it would be in dissociative disorders, primarily dissociative identity disorder. So those that have been on the receiving end of severe trauma, primarily sexual trauma. So that's my greatest area of strength. Then I've worked extensively with kids in the system. The kids actually that are being targeted, the majority of them, that are being targeted by the trans movement. So that's why I'm driven to speak out about that, because I know that population. Out in California, it's called severely emotionally disturbed kids. Right. So kids that are in group homes or those that are in residential treatment. And I primarily, near the end of that span of time, worked with girls, the most severe cases. So everything you see in the trans movement, I can speak to because I've been a therapist for 30 years, and I've worked with the the young people that are being targeted. And that's why I can speak so definitively that this is the greatest. So I'll give my little spiel, then I'll talk about the men. So my background is very unique in the sense that I can speak about the kids that are being exploited. That's all the trans movement is.
Right.
Or it's predatory individuals. You have predator and prey. That's all the trans movement is. After working with kids in the system and spent 11 years on psych staff in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. Started with SEI Crescent. That's where I was recruited to.
You're Pennsylvania based too, right?
Well, started native Californian.
Okay, because when you say SCI, that's usually like a Pennsylvania.
That's right, but then spent 16 years in Western Pennsylvania.
Got it.
Cool. Out of the Johnstown area. And then transitioned back, reconnected with my high school sweetheart after 40 years. And then she received a head trauma, compliments of her 70-pound dog. Don't get hit in the side of the head with a dog that's running full speed. So then we made a transition out to South Carolina. So that's where we are now, where I am currently, I think, probably the largest community-based sex offender treatment provider in South Carolina. I have 5 groups. And so I dealt with, circumlocution here. As far as my work with men, let me go back to the trans movement just for a moment. So sure. I can definitively tell people that the trans movement is the world's greatest lie, scam, and scheme that's ever been foisted upon vulnerable kids and their families, because it doesn't exist. It's man-made.
Amen.
Jennifer Billig has done a wonderful job focusing on the transhumanism end of things and the money behind it. I can just tell you about the clinical end of things, that it doesn't exist. Of course it exists. That's why we're having to talk about it. But it's a complete man-made, fabricated, perfect PR spin that now has been underway for 20 years. And it's brainwashed an entire generation of adults as well, of clinicians. I am absolutely mortified with the field of mental health. It's the most dangerous thing I've ever seen. And my kids are grown now. I got plenty to do rather than continue to talk about that. But when people are being harmed, so that's why no clinician will debate me on this. As a matter of fact, I'll open invitation again. You want to come on my live program, Brittany, you've got this live, right? On Friday nights, I do a regular kind of counseling podcast. It's called Journey to Healing, Friday nights, 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on tecn.tv. Come on my program. If you have the credentials, you come on, we'll debate about this. But nobody will.
You hear that, guys? Find your local clinician who is on whatever side of this, and especially those who are still propagating this, and go ahead and challenge them, to take John up on his offer, and apply some pressure, guys. Make these people hold themselves accountable. Put them in a situation to be held accountable. That's the only way that they're not going to be able to spin move, is really being live and in front of somebody like John, who has the experience and the credentials to call people out on this.
And we'll also talk about the deviant men, which is where our focus is going. But with the trans movement, and as a matter of fact, Stella and I have a little history together, very brief. So that's why I've appreciated you calling out Stella. I was going to interview Stella before GenSpect started, because it appeared like she was trying to help these kids. So I didn't know anything about her other than I had seen some tweets. And it turns out we couldn't coordinate our schedules. But I think almost on the day we were ready to roll, either she or I had to reschedule, and we never were able to. Well, now I'm glad, quite frankly.
When did we start GenSpect? Do you remember?
I think it was about the time that I transitioned out here to South Carolina. So about 2018, give or take.
Yeah.
So now I'm glad, because she blocked me. Because once I saw the Phil Illy, the deviant guy in the blue dress, and plus when I saw her interview Cantor, and I listened to the program you did about Cantor, right? Who is, in my estimation, and James and I, hopefully he and I will have a chance to debate live. He is one of the most dangerous individuals, because he is pushing the world's greatest scam as well. This minor attracted persons crap, his connection with prostasia. So he is hell-bent in normalizing. If he could, he'd legalize it. He knows he can't do a frontal approach to legalizing pedophilia, so they destigmatize it, and they want to add it to the alphabet soup, LGBT+++. They want to add the P. Why? Because then you've granted pedophilia civil rights protection.
Right.
And it just so happens, that would be bad enough, but James Cantor happens to have a treatment program where he can then write a letter, as it were, or appeal on behalf of the perp who's been busted, and have them diverted to treatment. Well, guess whose treatment program? So he also has a monetary incentive.
Right. Right.
And Cantor has, I would say this, he has limited experience. Quite frankly, he's talked about his experience with sex offenders. It's very limited. How can I say that? Because I've worked now 3 years in the community, and I know what access you have to criminal histories.
Right.
You have nothing compared to working in a prison. He never worked in a prison. He worked in a hospital where he did a year or 6 months internship in groups. Okay, I run groups. So he's a joke. He's an absolute joke, but it comes across so erudite. He fancies himself the second Mr. Spock on the original Leonard Nimoy. But no, his demeanor belies the reality that he is so agenda driven. And then that's where my background then. The reason I transitioned, pardon the pun, the reason I transferred from California to Pennsylvania is I was made an offer that turns out to be too good to be true, but the Lord oversees these things. I was made an offer to revamp one of the Children and Youth or Department of Children and Family Services departments, so Cambria County. So I took that over for a year, found out they don't take kindly to change or open,
It's like, what's the point of bringing somebody in to...
So I can speak to what those departments do. And then after that, opened up a group home, teen girls group home. Then after that, or while I was doing that, that's when the Department of Corrections came knocking in a reasonable way, but I threw away the application. It was a mutual friend and, or through a friend, and I didn't want to work in a prison and had some other opportunities, but the guy was very persistent. Well, little would I really know that the reason he was doing it until afterward, and then I saw the emails, he hadn't gotten rid of the emails, is that the state of Pennsylvania was being mandated to do something about guys in long-term solitary confinement, mental health inmates that were just languishing. Right. So through that experience, so I started, now in retrospect, once I figured out the whole situation, I was recruited to start the nation's first intensive treatment program in long-term solitary confinement with the worst of the worst. So through that, I accrued more clinical contact hours than any psychology staff member in prison. So any prison psych staff in the US or Canada. So my clients were the Hannibal Lecters and the rapists and pillagers and plunderers.
Wow.
So
you're a critical source, pretty much.
Right. And then from there, transitioned to running one of the standalone forensic units for sexually violent predators, and then continued to do high and low intensity treatment, sex offender treatment, did specialized evaluations. I'm certified in the hair psychopathy checklist. There was a handful of us that were hand selected. The DOC flew Dr. Robert Hare, who created the hair psychopathy checklist, the PCLR. So I'm certified in that. And after 11 years, decided to retire. And then I have a full-time caseload, regular folks, and then have my 5 groups. So I have 2 evening groups and 3 on Saturdays for sex offenders.
Wow.
And then I have my websites and my blog. And
so like I said, what you're trying to tell us is that you're a critical resource. You're a critical...
I know what I'm talking about. So now as we transition... to talk about the sexually deviant and dangerous men that are laughing all the way to the bank, whether in blue
Let me
dresses.
ask you a real quick question.
You notice Phil Illey, he didn't take me up on my offer. As a matter of fact, anyone has a standing offer. Any of these deviant men or anyone with any credentials has a standing offer to come on any of my platforms and debate me.
You hear that? We have 104 people in here. So everybody who's listening, either live or after, go and help, spread that word. And like I said, if you guys have, contacts, whatever, if you know clinicians or any of these other men, go apply some pressure and let them know that there is an open invitation, John K. Uhler, and he would like to talk to any of these people who think that they can give a solid and sound argument for why they do what they do. And, if they're confident, there's no reason. So, go ahead.
Let me add one other challenge that I have made, even in the video that I made about it through the interview with Ken Herdman, who was a treatment specialist, sort of a case manager, and he was doing specialized groups. So he and I rode together to SCI Somerset for 2 years. You get to know someone as a roadie, as a carpool partner. But I have a standing invitation to any state, federal, or provincial official that's connected with any prison system to prove me wrong that any man that wants to go into a female prison, therefore being facilitated into there, is an imminent threat to women, to the female inmates. Prove me wrong. And the second part of the offer is this: you, at your expense, either Mr. State, federal, or provincial prison official, you open up your records to me, give me full access to your mainframe, and I will show you that 100% of all the men that are desiring, seeking, or have been facilitated into a prison have perpetrated damage and harm to females. It's not that, well, only 50% or 75% are sex offenders. The rest either pled it down or weren't charged for it. How do I know? Because I had access to the mainframe for the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections for 11 years. So 100% of these men, this issue frosts me to no end. And you've done a great job, Brittany. People need to understand women are being traumatized and tortured by these very dangerous and deviant men, 100%. And prove me wrong, and no one will. I'll chew them up and spit them out because I know exactly what I'm talking about.
I love it.
A little exercise over this issue. Women are being harmed. The women that male prison has a full range of criminals. Female prisons have one of two extremes typically. You have those that were being used and manipulated, so we call them the codependents. About 80% of prisons are filled with about the codependent kind. They're non-dangerous, and it's traumatizing to go to prison, number one. Actually, I would say probably 90%. Or you have the really dangerous women, and quite frankly, they were probably abused. Right. And they're mad as hell, they ain't going to take it anymore. Or, the ones that got involved in gangs. But so unlike a male prison that has a full continuum of offenses, female prisons are different. And they have twice the mental health population. And in the state of Pennsylvania, they have a rating system. So severely emotionally disturbed or on the what they call the D roster for the severely mentally ill. They have twice that of the male population. So you're going to put a perp. And how can I say that? Because all the transes are ruse anyways. But, here's the joke of it. I'm the only psych staff in the U.S. that stood up for a trans inmate who was being abused. That was part of my whistleblowing.
Wow. And
therefore, somebody can look up Department of Justice versus SEI Crescent. I'm the reason they shut down SEI Crescent in Greensburg.
So you mean you're not doing this just because you hate trans people?
You like that?
Trans folks?
So, but the reality is this, and what's so funny, and Ken actually spoke to this on my interview with him, is generally speaking, the psych staff can't stand the trans guys because they're self-entitled. But virtually every one of them, why do they come into a prison system? They got busted for prostitution or drugs and alcohol in the midst of prostitution somewhere. These are guys that are prostituting themselves out or into drugs and alcohol. It's 100% lifestyle, which is a choice. Okay, right. So when they come into the prison system, and I actually just had another, he's in North Carolina. He is a prison psych nurse, a male psych nurse. He also works in a emergency room. And he said, "Can I ask you a question?" He said, why do people tolerate these self-entitled individuals? As a matter of fact, I had a couple of the inmates, the guys that are out now in my groups, and they asked the same question. They said, why are they kowtowing to these guys? He said, they all know, everybody knows. So in a male institution, everybody knows that the most preferential treatment is given to these trans guys. So this may sound contradictory. The legitimate trans guys, there's no such thing, but we're just going to use that label. Okay. So guys spreading around with breasts and first of all, what was his lifestyle before? He's into the male homosexual lifestyle. He's usually prostituting himself out. So does he fear male contact? No. Okay. Does he fear male attention? No. What kind of neighborhoods was he hanging around? Right. He doesn't have a lot of fear. He gets his own cell, which is rare, at least in Pennsylvania. It's going to be the same thing no matter. He gets special commissary. He gets to bump to the head of the line. And here's the other inmates you say, Julie, these guys, they get their shirts wet and they press up against the windows. Okay, they're taunting the officer, they flash everybody, so to speak. Okay. So first of all, they're not fearful. So there's the lie. If they are the legitimate trans males, they want to stay in the male prisons. Right. Because they get preferred treatment and they get a little entertainment. And if they want to hook up, they end up hooking up. It's the deviant men that are the predatory ones that want to go into the female prisons.
Right. The ones who want to target. And I don't know if you ever, and I'll send it to you after this. I did a compilation video called Wolves in the Hen House. And I had a clip I think it was it was the first trans-identifying male in California, I believe, either California or I forget which state. I think it was California, to ever be transferred to a women's prison. And he's clearly a homosexual transsexual. And he literally talks about what you just said. He's like, I wasn't sure at first if I wanted to do it because I kind of have it pretty good here in the men's place, and I'm not going to lie. I do sometimes use my feminine charms to get what I need. And I knew that if I transferred to the women's, I wasn't going to have that sort of, barter system that I'm able to do with some of the men here. But I decided to do it because I thought that it was the right thing for me to do to pave the way for other trans women, even though I really wasn't excited at first. But then I thought about it and I decided, yes, this is something I want to do. This is monumental, and this is history in the making. So I decided to do it. And he literally was very candid about realizing that, he had so many things back in the men's prison that was really accommodating for him. And he had access. He said,
he was being paid. He was being paid. There's some incentive to go.
Yes.
So the quote unquote trans inmates, the males, want to stay in the male unit. And the joke of it is none of the psych staff want to deal with these guys because they're histrionic and self-centered and self-entitled and narcissistic. So they are time intensive. So guess whose caseload they would always put them on? Mine. Did any of these trans inmates ever file a grievance? And trust me, in the Pennsylvania Department, in any prison system, all the inmates have is time on their hands, and they're very litigious. They know the rules and regulations. 3.2.8 point. Oh my gosh, they're like want to be little attorneys. Okay, so the question is this: in 11 plus years, how many grievances were filed against me? Including, radical Muslims, anybody. Zero.
Okay.
If you were so bigoted,
right.
If you can go 11 plus years, I almost wonder if I started to lose my edge about, my effectiveness. So that's pretty good. If you can be in a prison system for 11 plus years and have no grievances filed against you.
No, that's not bad.
Evidently, you're not too phobic.
It's not bad.
And that's including kicking guys out of sex offender treatment group.
Right.
So if you can kick a guy out and he can't file a grievance, meaning he knows it's futile, because that's going to delay their parole. Right.
Yeah. So you're telling us that it's not, from a place of just hatred for fellow people. Yeah. And
I did have one grievance because I did kick a perp out. As a matter of fact, I think he's appeared. I think he got out of prison. I think he's appeared, and now he is a troll on my page.
Really?
He's trolling me because he has an axe to grind.
There's scenes to be like, there's one person, John, my dog is whining. I'm going to put you on single, talk to them for 2 seconds, and I'm going to quickly.
So I'll keep the audience entertained. If they have any questions.
Oh, whoops. Yeah. Anybody, are you able to, do you know how to access the,
No, unless I go to if you want to tell me how to do it. I'm pretty tech challenged. Oh, there's comments. Wait. Oh, I see them. Okay. Let's see. I see one here. Okay. Does he believe TIMs? I have to claim ignorance here. TIM. I'm embarrassed to say I don't know if I know what TIM is. To be what we call predisposed sex offenders. So somebody will have to clarify what TIM is. Nobody's predisposed to being a sex offender. Here's my take on sex offenders. It is male deviance. We will go into that, by the way, because I didn't understand deviance. Oh, there he goes. Trans-identified male. There you go. Okay. Does he believe Tim's to be what I call predisposed? No. Trans-identified males within the trans movement, so to speak, you either have predator or prey. Now you have financial predators and sexual predators. That's what we see going on. And also within the male homosexual community, I think you probably have, this is just my own subjective sense, 60%, 70% guys that were abused, and the rest are just predators that were not abused. Male sexuality is very different than female sexuality. And the issue, and that'll bring us full circle into what we're going to be talking about, all the sexual deviants that are wearing dresses, that are trying to get into and trying to affect their narrative, trying to control the narrative in the trans movement. So all the AGPs, those are just sexually deviant males, because the ones we're dealing with are activists. Okay. The issue is male deviance, and I'll describe that in a moment. Male deviance, ever since the 70s, has now been fueled by or supercharged by pornography. So here are some facts for you. It doesn't matter anybody's opinion, here are the facts. In this day and age, and certainly ever since 2005, when I was in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, so you have to assume it's since the 80s, that 100% of all sex offenders were deeply steeped in pornography prior to offending. 100%. So you have no sex offending without deviance, and in this day and age, you have no sex offending without pornography that fueled and supercharged the process of deviance. There's a process that through which a man descends into deviance. And when you hear the term deviance, and here I heard it all the time on staff, my background is not criminal justice. My background is counseling, counseling psychology. So you kind of go along with the term, but nobody can define it. Well, I'll tell you exactly what it means now, because I worked hard to figure this out. And when it occurred to me, this should send shockwaves to everybody listening. Okay. Deviance is different than male lust and male attraction. Okay. When Debbie David Hayton, the little deviant man, okay, and I just did a interview with Uta Hagen on unmasking the trans movement. I have that website and the same YouTube channel. If you all want a good fact-based resource how to unmask the trans movement, go to Unmasking the Trans Movement on YouTube or on my page. So Uta Hagen, we unmasked David Hayton. Okay, and the reality is these guys are deviant behind the scenes. That's all these guys are. Brittany, you're careful and you do a wonderful job, and you reference fetish. They're just perverts.
Right.
Okay, this is just perversion. Now I'm in the field, right? So the DSM calls it fetishic, her fetishes and all that. Okay, but the reality is this: they're sexual deviants.
Right.
Now male deviance is this, where a normal guy can only get an erection when he knows that his partner is, I'm going to use male, female, okay? When he knows that his partner is enjoying herself. Mm-hmm. That's a normal man. Right. So that's why the mood matters. So if all of a sudden she says she's not in the mood, he will lose his erection. Or let's say just at the moment of climax, they're both together, they're having intimacy, they're having sex, and all of a sudden she looks up. So he's on top. She looks up and says, "Oh, I really need to clean the ceiling." What would happen for a normal guy?
Yeah, it would kill it.
Over.
Right.
Right. So male sexuality, normal male sexuality, intrinsically is tied to the female response.
Right.
And
reciprocal.
There you go. Right. And that's the way it's supposed to be. Right. So there isn't to be any pressuring. There isn't to be any self-centeredness. It is to be giving. As a guy becomes more selfish, as a guy begins to override his conscience, as his ego grows, there will be things that will happen within him. He'll morph through different stages to where it'll be less about the person and more about him.
Right.
That's the process of objectification, right? And you just don't sexually objectify somebody. You can financially objectify somebody. If you ever go onto a car lot to purchase a car, guess what they're doing to you all? Any of us. They're sexually they're financially checking us out. They're financially objectifying us. When a man reaches a certain point of self-centeredness and ego, then it will not only be all about him, but he will start to reach a point where instead of loving people and using things, he's using people and loving things. He will start to reach a point where his excitement is no longer in the pleasure of his partner, but in the harm.
Right. Right.
So a deviant man can only get an erection when he knows that he's causing duress or trauma in someone. That's a predator.
Right.
And I'm here to tell anyone that 100% of all the activistic men, how do I define activistic? Any of the men that somebody would start to list their names off for us. That's how we know about them.
Right.
The unquote normal AGPs, you don't know their name. Why? Because they don't want attention.
Right.
So any of the men that we're talking about, including Phil Illey, who won't come on and debate me, the little coward.
Yeah, right.
Okay. They're deviant. So I'm telling you what they do behind the scenes. That's why they're a present risk.
Why can't people see it? Like, how is it that we have people who not only don't see the risk that he posed, but actively advocates on his behalf as being either, a non-risk or even helpful? And, this idea of these AGP men, like David Hayden or Phil Illey, that they're helpful, that they have something to contribute.
Or even Julie Bindel. I mean, talk about a woman that has a fiery hatred towards men, but I just saw a picture. She has her arm around this guy.
Right.
And little do they know. There's probably a couple of reasons why. I'll just throw them out. One is let's take the Julie Bindel kind. As a matter of fact, I featured her in a video I did about the dangers of prostitution and how it's absolutely exploitive, this misnomer of sex work. And so I featured her in there, and I actually sent her a copy of it, and she nearly skewered me. Like, who are you and how dare you? And you're a male. I don't want to talk to you. Wow. I was close to getting her out of my video, but she's done good work. Nasty woman. So that's what's so ironic. Here's a woman who, it appears, other than going on talk shows with men, has a real hatred, a deep-seated hatred of men. Well, why she have her arm around or taking a nice photo? With some of the worst. Right? Because that hatred, so maybe on the extreme, you would have somebody that's so blinded by, and therefore the question is, how did they become so angry to where now they just have grouped all men? It would be the same thing about all women. But anytime I group people, the question is, why am I doing that? How did I get to that point? She probably has been severely harmed. And so now there's no good man out there.
Well, that's one thing, but for me, it's the hypocrisy. It's if that's really how, and I talk to a lot of female separatists, women who really advocate for living completely separatist lifestyles. And I support that and appreciate that for some people, that's what they need for whatever reason to feel safe. But how do you go from that, right, to defending Katie John and also defending even I posted a clip and everyone's like, oh, it's an ancient clip, but it's still relevant, where she's talking about, she was asked by the interviewer her thoughts on trans-identified male lesbians and whether or not they're valid lesbians. And again, remembering that Julie Bindel is the co-founder of this lesbian organization that's supposed to be promoting the rights of lesbians, and she says, yes, I do think that they are. I think I saw that
clip. Okay, this whole thing, people need to understand this. Bottom line, these guys are laughing all the way to the bank. These are porn-fueled men. Okay, so the question is this: do the Julie Bindels or Stella? Okay, we'll address this to Stella. Maybe she's listening right now. Stella, first, why did you ban me? Why did you block me, Stella. From GenSpect? Number one, I'm still waiting.
Because you're calling her out. She cannot handle any sort of critique.
So Stella, from one psychotherapist to the other, that's an erudite term, Stella. Okay, so we'll just go with that. So from one psychotherapist to another, Stella, why did you block me? I simply invited you onto my program to discuss this issue, that why you, who head up this kind of nebulous organization called GenSpect, why you allowed, I'll speak to her rationale in a moment, but why you allowed a guy in a blue dress to walk around GenSpect's seminars.
Right.
On the grounds.
And not only that, but then, it's like even the caption, and she says that it was some intern who posted it. It's always conveniently somebody else.
Yeah, well, she's the head of it. The buck has to stop somewhere.
And when we see Stella, she's the one who can, honestly, she does handle a lot of the
and so whether Benjamin Boyce, and I'm to his credit, he hasn't gotten rid of my video. He and I sat down, right?
I will say that about Benjamin Boyce. Right? Same thing with him and I. Like, he unfollowed me, but he hasn't blocked me, and he hasn't removed my interview with him or your interview with him. And so I will say he does maintain his. So one thing about Stella, she always talks about how she's this free speech and she believes in the marketplace of ideas and everybody. And yet that's not true, because she blocks anybody who disagrees. And one thing, like you said, at least Benjamin Boyce doesn't go back and take down.
Megan Murphy removed my video with her, and we were just talking about sex offenders and male deviants. So that's sad, although I preserved it on my YouTube channel. So here's how you take
a good grasp on her. I don't have a good grasp on where she really stands.
Well, and okay, so Eva Kirilova, sorry. You know, I've got a number of interviews, and Laura Becker on unmasking the trans movement. I've had them on. And so it's very strange. So after we had Laura on, we had a very good interview, I thought, but we were going to do a second one, and she was having a difficult time as we were ready to launch part two, kind of a second interview. Meaning she emotionally was having a very difficult time. So
I'm sorry, you were talking about Laura or
Laura Becker.
Oh, Laura. Yeah, Laura's not in a good place.
Yeah.
Mentally or emotionally.
So it's just interesting how certain people will flip, and one moment they sort of like you, the other they don't. But I've got a couple different thoughts hanging out there. Sorry. Okay, let me help those that are connected with GenSpect. So, or in more now the PR end of things, like Benjamin Boyce. The question's been raised. Well, what do you do? That was big. Stella's big thing.
Right.
What do you do?
Right. What do you do?
He would have sued us and won. No, Stella, I'll tell you what you would do. What would I do if I'm running GenSpect? I'm doing a conference and I see this guy in this blue dress peddling his little book. I walk up to him. I say, "Hey, I'm John Uhler. I'm head of this organization. Who are you?" "Oh, I'm Mr. Deviant. I'm Phil Ellie." "Oh, Phil, I tell you what." And I would grab him by the arm. We're locking arms close. I'm affirming him, and I'm walking him to an exit. I'm walking him to an exit.
Right.
And I sort of resist. I said, "Oh no, now I've got my arm around him, and guy to guy, I'm moving him to an exit." And he'll say, "What are you doing?" I say, "Oh, don't you know? You must not know what this organization is and what this conference is." He says, "I'm here." No, I'll tell you what, you're not here because you're going to traumatize people. And my job is to keep them safe. And I don't know if you know it, but I tell you what, you've been whacking off in the morning filled with pornography, and I don't want it in here. And you're not going to traumatize kids. So if you even want to come back, you dress appropriately, and we'll have a little talk first. But you're deviant, and you and I both know it. So take your little deviant rear end and get it out of this place before I call the cops on you, because I think you've been propositioning people, haven't you?
And that's it. And then him getting a hold of Laura.
His little blue dress out there, Phil Ellie. Okay, so 100% of these guys.
What does it say about GenSpect? What does it say about GenSpect that Phil felt comfortable? That's my biggest thing. It's like, "Oh, what would you have done?" And it's like, well, let's go back even further, right? Even before, what about GenSpect? What about you and what message you're sending? Did Phil feel comfortable not only purchasing a ticket, but getting dressed in the morning and then bringing a stack of his books?
It started with that Debbie David Hayden interview. And I didn't even connect the two. It wasn't until Uda was describing, she said, "Well, he's the guy that Stella interviewed." I said, "Wait a second, that's the guy?" Okay, so I've done a number of interviews with Uda as well as Tracy Shannon with trans widows. Okay, the reality is this. None of these guys need our sympathy. These guys are 100% deviant.
Thank you.
Which means this. They're within the realm of psychopaths.
Right.
Okay, people need to understand that. There's sociopathy and psychopathy. These are not unique standalone things. Let me describe it, because I'm certified in the Hare Psychopathy checklist. I've done forensic assessments of psychopaths. I had an offer to go on to work for the Sex Offender Assessment Board of Pennsylvania, the SOAB board. The SOAB board is a secondary assessment means of ensuring public safety when a guy's coming out of the institution. So a guy's coming up for parole, I would do the specialized parole eval for them. Then the SOAP board also does a secondary evaluation. Guess what assessment instrument that the SOAP board uses as part of their normal protocol? The PCLR, the hair psychopathy checklist.
Right.
Why do they do that? Because it is inherent within sex offending that you have likely high degrees of psychopathy. Why? What is a psychopath, by the way? And you have bloody and white-collar psychopaths. And I'm convinced there are a lot of white-collar psychopaths. And Robert Hare himself said if he hadn't studied them in prison, he really didn't. He took inmates that clearly, based upon their criminal history, were psychopathic and did functional MRIs with them. Okay, he said if he hadn't studied them in prison, he would study them on Wall Street. So you tell me, right? And he wrote a good book called Snakes in Suits. Therefore, they're
medicine.
They're not rare, right? They're all over the place. Where do they go? Politics, finance. So the thing about it, here's the 3 characteristics of psychopath and why they're playing Stella and others for fools. But now we have to ask, is Stella being played or is she facilitating this? So a psychopath is simply this: somebody without a conscience. It's not nature, nurture, genetics. Those all play a little bit of a role. But the issue is this: how do you become a psychopath? You're not born that way. How do you know? It's anybody who has dealt with psychopaths. It's a theory, but we have, there's such a thing as a psychopathic brain. Once your brain becomes psychopathic, you ain't going back. And the thing about a psychopath is this: the psychopath has no conscience. That's how you become a psychopath. You override your conscience long enough and you will. So no conscience, therefore no remorse and no empathy. Now overlay that with sexuality. Now you're dealing with a predator. And the one thing about a psychopath versus a sociopath, how do you understand a sociopath? To be a sociopath, you first have to be a narcissist. A
sociopath is more like
I'll describe it. Right? So to understand it, it builds upon the other. We hear the dark triad. It's redundant. It sounds fancy, but it's a silly term, and I'll tell you why. Have you ever found a non-narcissistic psychopath? No. Simple narcissists will let you know they're narcissists. Right? Self-aggrandizing. A smart narcissist will never let you know. Well, how do they not let you know? Because they perfected the art of impression management. That's one of the characteristics of psychopath. Narcissists are emotional black holes. It's all about them. They feel self-entitled. There's nothing wrong with their self-esteem. It's whacked out, but there's nothing wrong with it. You have to feel pretty good about yourself to strategically override boundaries. As you begin to polish your talent of overriding boundaries, you're becoming an expert at how to win friends, influence people, at sales. Now you're a sociopath. So a sociopath is the consummate salesperson, but they will stop when boundaries are implemented. They will get, well, the getting's good. They operate on cost-benefit analysis. When the cost is too much, they'll move on. A psychopath, you continue down that road, being a sociopath first. Now you're working people. The difference between sociopath and psychopath is sales. Psychopath is all about having a negative effect. Let that sink in, because that's why deviance is important.
So it's not even just about so you're saying it's not just about self-serving, but it's about self-serving plus actually having a negative.
What gets you off, what motivates a psychopath, is not just getting over on someone, but knowing they're generating harm.
Right.
Now, the question is this: what kind of guys would dress up in women's underwear? There's a danger right there. The question is where they get their underwear. I'll tell you where they got them from: laundromats and other places.
Yeah.
And I say to anybody, prove me wrong.
Or their family, their wives, their children,
the underwear, like Sam Britton.
Okay. They said that Caitlyn Jenner was stealing like their daughters,
and by the time a guy's stealing underwear, we got really serious issues. Think about it. I've been working with sex offenders for 15 years.
Right.
Okay. Now the question is this:
do these guys ever get like honest, or do they stay?
Not until very few of them. I've had probably in 15 years, I've had probably 2 that have gotten honest. Okay. They lie through their teeth. They are the world's greatest liars. So, James Canner, when you're telling me about your definitive research, or Blanchard or Zucker, anybody that claims to work with sex offenders, if you take the self-reports of the world's greatest criminal minds and greatest liars, Sam Brinton, for example, that's your data.
Well, if you look at through Cantor, I was looking through a lot of Cantor and Blanchard. I was going through a lot their resources. Like, so I was going through a bunch of his papers and research, and then I was looking at his citations. His citations are himself. It's like him and his friend.
No, right. And
I
found a research paper on Cantor. What kind of mind? Okay, it's a case study on a guy that basically is into cannibalism or consuming himself. Okay, do you know how dark somebody has to get? Okay, I worked with the worst of the worst kind of inmates for years. James Dobson had a few hours with Ted Bundy. I've worked years behind the scenes with these guys, so I can tell you about the criminal mind and how it gets there. And it's essential that people understand. So Stella, here's the question. I'll tell you part of why I think Stella doesn't want to touch this issue. Nobody in the trans that's working with anybody trans will touch the issue of pornography. That is the elephant in the middle of the room. Without pornography and without the DSM-5, published in 2013, the entire trans deception would fade away.
Is it because of the money that pornography generates?
It's the grooming.
The grooming, yeah.
It's the grooming. Right. So the vast majority, about 80% of those in the trans movement are the victims. And you've nailed it time and time again, Brittany. These are the emotionally vulnerable and damaged and easily exploited, and that's exactly what Phil Illy is doing.
Look at Laura. The number one person that he spent time talking to about his theories of autoandrophilia and who he took the photo was with Laura Becker. Anybody who takes even the slightest interest at the most cursory surface level to look into this woman can immediately see, my God, no, she is so vulnerable, so unwell, and have Stella O'Malley platforming her on these panels and talking to her. And she's talking about her crack addiction and being groomed by men on Grindr, these gay dating sites, and clearly letting us all know that she is so unable to care for herself properly. And so I was like, that's great. That's great.
No, and it's horrific. So you've got so many, I have so many concerns about GenSpect. Right. That number one, the greatest is now they have so lowered the bar on safeguarding. So I wouldn't allow any of my own, if I had a control over anybody, right? Because now I'll tell you what, guess what's going to happen in the next conference? How many more blue dresses are we going to see strutting around? More and more. It's now, you're going to see this because why? Because guys love it. These deviant guys, because they're out for effect. I'll tell you, drag queen story hour kind of thing. What is that used for? It's really to, that's sort of the tip of the spear, right? For the predators to test the resolve of the community and the degree of discernment. Because if you allow that in your community, that's so clearly grooming, then you're so dumbed down that now they're going to wave a flag and all the predators know that's a user-friendly community, and therefore it has user-friendly schools and user-friendly YMCAs and user-friendly safe space after-school programs and user-friendly Boy Scout troops.
How do people, I think my biggest question is, it's like, to me, it's so obvious, and the way that you break it down is so masterfully, is so... It's amazing that it's like, yes, everybody should be listening to you and immediately being like, my God, you're right. Of course. I feel like any person with any sort of normal moral compass or, genuine interest in the welfare of children and their community as a whole would listen to this and wouldn't need a single other piece of shred of evidence to be like, my God, you're absolutely right. What is it then that keeps people continuingly to create these elephant circles around predator men like this to protect them and enable them and usher them right in, whether it's ushering them right into the gender critical community, whether it's ushering them into children's schools to read books, into the government? Why are there so many enablers?
Because it speaks to the masterful art of the psychopath. Right. Again, we think of, like most people think of what I thought of when I heard the term psychopath. We think Freddy Krueger. We think, right? It's very few. Think about when we try to keep kids safe. And of course, we all need to keep kids safe. And in churches, my number one concern, I have a site called churchprotect.org. Okay, so my number one concern are churches. So the most sophisticated of sexual predators target houses of work, faith-based organizations, churches. Okay, why? Because think about the access to kids. So they will go where the greatest access and ease.
And there's a level of trust in the community.
There you go. So that's targets of opportunity. But that's not enough, really, for a psychopath. Part of it is the thrill of the hunt. And part of it is they fancy themselves, because once somebody becomes psychopathic, again, think about the motivation. They're not motivated over sex and sexuality. As a matter of fact, when David Hayton he went on a talk show. I heard him. He's describing AGP. Okay, I'll clarify what AGP is. It's full of crap. Okay, let's just clarify it now. Now, the question is this: who are we talking about with these AGP guys? We're not talking about guys that are seeking out therapy.
Right.
So AGP is this stupid term. Quite frankly, okay, it sounds Greek, and but we're not. Who sat in front of Blanchard to come up with these terms? I'll tell you what, one of two guys, and I work with guys all the time.
And it's to confuse it, really. It's to make it seem like it's this complex and nuanced, and you can't rush to.
Anytime somebody says, "Well, it's nuanced," no, it's not nuanced.
Yeah, it's really not that.
When you start using the term nuance, you're either a sucker or you're propagandizing. Don't tell me the nuanced stuff. I'm working with sex offenders. You want to tell me that's nuanced? No, I'll tell you what it's predatory individuals, and you'd better be able to figure out what's in front of your face if you want to keep women and children safe. Don't talk to me about nuance. Okay, if you're talking to me about nuance, you're either brain dead, you're either a useful idiot, or you're pushing this crap and you're financially or sexually benefiting. And you're probably running or pushing a prostitution ring or sex trafficking. Prove me wrong.
Let's go, John. You're like setting the whole thing on fire.
Probably for a couple of things. And here's my greatest concern. I'll give her the benefit of the doubt, which is then my greatest concern. Because number one, it means she's being played and she can't see for looking. She thinks she's bright, but then here's the other conclusion, or the real concerns is, okay, if she's neutral, why is she doing an interview with James Canner and Bailey? Do you know what Michael Bailey did, the deviant guy? I've got a video out there that shows the clip of the news report that was done when he was a professor for Northwestern University. Okay, let this sink in. This is Michael Bailey, who wrote the little words talking complimenting David Hayton on how brilliant his book was. So Michael Bailey was, Stella and Sasha did a podcast with Michael Bailey and a research paper. Okay, Michael Bailey won't debate me either. And he says, you're a nobody, and go get a name and I might think about it. Yeah.
Because I'm sorry, I'm not like,
you want to debate this subject, come on. Okay, so you tell me.
I always think it would be so easy to make a name if I just wanted to sell myself out to anybody who wanted to leg me up to the next thing. And I would say, like, I had Buck Angel who used to love me, Buck Angel, Ariel Scarcella, these people who wanted to platform me and leg me up. And it's like, I'm sorry, I'm not interested in selling myself out. Benjamin Boyce had platformed me. I could have sat there and lapdog to these people. It's easy to make a name to become this, this little internet celebrity or whatever, when you don't care about selling out your own values, when it's fine, we'll just smudge it for whoever I need to suck up to. But when you're actually holding a hard line, it kind of limits your options of people that are going to help you get to the next stage, because you're not willing to sell out what you know is right just to enable them and suck up to them so that they'll pull you in.
Okay, here's a question. If somebody offered to have me do, so if Michael Bailey were to reach out and say, hey, you want to do a research article together? Are you kidding me? And Canner too? Well, let's join forces. Let's find common ground. Let's do a research. He's published, I'm not. What an easy way to, if you think I would publish anything, if you think I want my name associated with any of those individuals. Okay, Michael Bailey. Here's what this guy did. Let this sink in. And Stella just did a research paper with this guy. Okay. Michael Bailey, when he was a professor at Northwestern University, again, let this sink in. He's a sexologist. In my estimation, I don't know of a male sexologist that isn't a deviant, and this is simply cover for them being able to do research into their deviance. Okay, because I don't hear any male sexologists coming out condemning these individuals, like Cantor and his push for destigmatizing pedophilia. Where's the sexologist standing up and saying, what the heck? So Michael Bailey, as a professor for Northwestern, he thought it to be a reasonable thing that after one of his classes, he apparently announces to his class, and he had 100% attendance apparently, or probably 110%, that there was going to be a live demonstration.
I can already see where this is going. I'm like scared.
This is Michael Bailey.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Okay.
Real quick, shout out to Karen Davis. I say it all the time, but shout out to Karen Davis again for being brave enough and strong enough to call this stuff out early, and it's what lost to her platform, but shout out to her.
Okay, so here's Michael Bailey. You're a professor. I worked as an adjunct instructor for Geneva College for 8 years, teaching in their adult degree completion program. I know protocols and things.
Right.
So Michael Bailey arranged for a live demonstration after a class, and here they come. Here's going to be their demonstration. A man and a woman shows up. The woman disrobes, lays down on a table naked. The guy pulls out what amounts to a jigsaw, or the kind of saw that you cut through metal. He puts a dildo on the end of it. He plugs it in and he fires it up and puts it inside of her. It was known as the F saw. Okay. Michael Bailey. Now I'm working in
these are our top educational institutions.
Okay, I'm working in a prison, and guess what goes through my mind about a guy that would insert a power tool into a woman's vagina and fire it up? Oh, I'm sorry. What goes through my mind are the criminal histories that I've read about.
Right.
So Michael Bailey thought it a reasonable thing. Has he ever repented? Oh, no. But guess who wants to have him feature her in a research article? If you think I'd have my name anywhere associated with that deviant, Stella, then has him on a program. You think I'm going to have a common, nice discussion with Michael Bailey on my
I have nothing in common with
Cantor? So she's featured a pro-pedophile and a heinously deviant sexologist, these sexologists.
Thank you.
As part of GenSpect. And now she's got Phil Illy, these deviant guys, and she has no problem with it. So she's either brain dead when it comes to male deviance, so therefore she's putting at risk those who are coming to her, those that are vulnerable.
That's the thing. She positions herself as this sort of oasis for families that are in crisis. I mean, some of our most vulnerable people.
Opened the door. This is the next best thing to church for these perps.
Right.
She's opened the door for predators, for extremely dangerous sexual deviants, and that's why there's going to be more of them next year, because she failed the test. She failed the safeguarding test.
Right.
What
And everybody knew and broadcasted. And I don't know if you remember, I think it was in 2022, but I remember there was the whole, the debate was still raging about David Hayton and Stella O'Malley. And the official GenSpect position was, we need to have trans-identifying males, right? We need to have these AGP men available and on hand, because it's the only way that gender questioning children will listen to what we have to say. They're not going to hear it from us. They need to hear men who are actively acting out their fetish and are actively living this lifestyle to sit there and talk to kids about why they shouldn't do it.
And Stella's a fool, okay? Because I'll reinterpret that.
She's either a fool or
you're handing a child that's clearly being groomed, because if a child shows if a child gives signs or indicators, and here's my greatest concern about the trans movement, by the way, and those that are mandated reporters within working with kids. Okay, so if you work with kids on any regular or consistent basis, you are a mandated reporter. You therefore have to, every other year, at least in Pennsylvania, I think it's the case in every state. Every other year, you have to redo your continuing education units on child abuse. Okay, so you're aware of the signs of child abuse. The trans movement reframes or rebrands, but reframes the 9 key red flag clinical indicators of sexual abuse. It reframes it in terms of gender. So therefore, it renders a mandated reporter unable to meaningfully identify the red flags of a kid being perped on.
Right.
And it inverts it. So Stella was there. I'll tell you what Stella should have done. And that's the reason why when Michael Bailey was on her podcast with Sasha, and Michael Bailey talks about a case. He's going to give a case disposition. He knew of a 3-year-old who was cross-dressing and showed these different signs. Well, anybody that works with kids, if you see a kid that is acting in a sexualized fashion, and it's different. My son, my daughter dressed her younger brothers up in tutus and things.
Yeah,
he was running around in cowboy boots and a tutu and shooting his kid. Right? We're not talking about that. We're talking about if he starts showing signs that he's been perped on, we better be able to catch it. So if you have a man in the home who's dressing in women's underwear, why would he do that? No man in this day and age thinks it's a reasonable proposition to dress in women's underwear unless he's saturating himself in porn.
Right. Or young girls who want to have their breasts amputated all of a sudden
that's the greatest indicator of sexual abuse, because the most common thing that you'll hear when you're working with kids, because no kid's going to walk up to you saying they're being perped on, they're going to drop hints. So the number one red flag of all times that anybody should know, so whether you're a teacher or you're a therapist, if a kid comes in and says, I hate being, so it's typically a girl that you're going to hear this from, I hate being a girl, I wish I was a boy. That's the red flag she's being perped on.
Right. Hello? Right. She wants to desexualize herself. So if I was a boy, they wouldn't be targeting me.
So if you're a predator apologist, if you're a predator protector, if you're part of a cult, what's the one thing you can't have at that moment? You can't have a therapist begin to nose around. Begin to ask any further questions. So you better control the narrative, meaning these perps and the perp apologists and the trans activists, they've controlled the narrative that said, no. Once a kid says that, you got to fast track them off to sterilization and amputate their body parts. The trans movement is a moving sidewalk that dumps kids out on a surgeon's gurney.
Right. And it's funny because, Joshua Moon, I bring this up a lot and I just think it's so pertinent. Joshua Moon, who's the founder of Kiwi Farms, talks about, he has a podcast called Mad at the Internet. It's on Rumble. And he talks about this being a rat king. That, Rat King, where they find it's a bunch of like rats in the wintertime that will huddle together for the cold. And when they try to pull apart, their tails have been so intertwined that they're stuck together. And the concept is that this whole thing is a rat king where everybody has something to gain. And this has somehow been this common point where it's like, maybe, whatever their motive is slightly different, but they all have something to gain. So it's like, they're all kind of like, converged together around this thing.
It's the greatest collection of dark special interests. I did a video called Understanding the Trans Movement. So it's on my YouTube. And near the end, I have a chart. And it's kind of a colorful chart, but I put together these different, I just started to list them off, the different special interests. So you have medical, you have financial, like the banks, apparently you can get credit cards now. These young kids can get credit cards to pay for their sex change. So you got banks that are very interested in this, financial institutions. Right. You've got big pharma. Where else are you going to get a client for life, customer for life, cradle to the grave? This is it. Right. So it's perfect population for them. So now it's the gender industry. Right.
I think you're dismantling the family unit. So it's this idea, and I think that's
right. The social, you want to change a culture.
It's a chosen family. If your family doesn't support you and what you want to do, then you can choose your family and clitter families and things like that. And it's like, once we start to destabilize the family unit, it's the best weapon for the government to sort of, take control. And, it's through families that we learn our values and our core sense of who we are and our responsibility to our family, to ourselves, to our community. And it's like, that's always been the one thing that the government can never fully interfere with, because children are born from the bodies of their family. And we have that first sort of access to our children. But once you can start to teach children and access children earlier and earlier, because they have devices in their hands, they have an indoctrination computer right there that's telling them, don't trust your mom. Your mom doesn't really get you. She doesn't understand you the way that we do. If you listen to us, they just don't get it. They don't love you. They're phobic. They don't, you're just born special, and you need special people who truly understand you and can help develop you. And over time, it's just this total breakdown and this decentralization or re-centralization towards government, towards whoever else, these other powers that are destroying the family and taking away our ability to decide what our values are, our identity as a people is. It's terrifying.
That's right. And people should be concerned about it. And that's why Jennifer Billick, when she started adding about transhumanism, I hadn't really thought about that as much. It's part and parcel. But right. Brittany, what you're bringing up is very important. I'll continue with the dark special interests, by the way. I'll rattle them off. But so do I believe that this is 100% coordinated? Absolutely not. I think it's exactly this, what you described as the rats together.
Yes.
I liken it to jackals that are feeding off a carcass of a kid. It's graphic, but so you probably have some coordination within different groups. Of course you do. Like the medical hospitals will then donate money, or banks will donate money to hospitals. It's money laundering too. Hospitals will donate money to universities. Universities then have the gender studies, and then some of those gender study people will then, the students or the grad students, not only are they pushing on the kids, but they will be the activists that will go and read to the kids. The kids then learn about, they start to question their own gender, then they start to get transitioned, then they go for sex change to the hospitals that started the funding process.
Right.
Okay, so there's a grand loop. So you could say there's coordination among those. But if you ultimately, so the ones I'm most concerned about ultimately, as far as who's the most diabolical, it's really what you just listed, the Schwabs, those Soroses. Because how do you ultimately create a top-down system around the world? Ultimately, you have to remove the ability for people to think in human terms. So instead of loving people and using things, you're going to now invert everything. You then ultimately disconnect people from their humanity. How do you do that? You remove the idea of family. Family is how people are humans are cultivated, and conscience is cultivated. So if there's no difference, if it doesn't matter where you raise a child, then a group home or the foster care situation, it should be just fine. But we know that it's traumatizing to remove a child from his or her home. Why? If you put them in an institution, now they have no loyalty, they have no affinity. And now look what happens, for instance, in any communist army. And how do they treat women and children? Right. So the more you remove the importance of the nuclear family, you now can mold, if you're top down, if you want to create a dictatorial kind of situation, you have to get rid of the family. And so
it's the same reason in China when they created eunuchs, part of castrating these eunuchs and then bringing them into the Chinese royal palace. The castration is symbolic too, because it's saying you're cutting your ties to your family of origin. You're now loyal only to us, and it's the same thing even when they would take children, like in the Liberian Civil War conflict in the 90s, when they were removing children from their families and saying that's no longer your family is now the army. And they were training them as these child soldiers and actually sometimes taking care of them the way you would take care of a child so that they would become so loyal and do anything.
That's the method, right? That's exactly what cults do. So users, manipulators, perpetrators, predators, cult leaders, all the same thing. Really.
Right.
They know these time-tested techniques. So you divide and conquer, you separate them out. Think about the term now that's starting to become codified, anti-conversion therapy. Let me tell you what the term is. Okay, and familiar with it, right? I'm in the field, I understand it, but think about this idea, and this is how you'll understand why Sam Brinton was pushing this stuff. What do cults do? Cults are going to draw kids away from their family. Now the cult is their new family.
Yes.
So I'm a cult and I've got your kid, let's pretend. Meaning they become a cult member. So I'm their new family. Well, if you're the actual family and you want to extricate you know that your kid is under my spell. I've cast a spell. I'm brainwashing this kid. That's why the kid can look at you as the enemy. Well, it used to be in the 70s and 80s that families would pay deprogrammers to pull up, grab their kid, put them in a car, zoom off to a cabin and deprogram, like the Moonies would, the Hare Krishnas would. It used to be like an LA International Airport. When you would walk in, you had all the Moonies or the Hare Krishnas out there with their little symbols, dancing and collecting money. I remember seeing that.
And I remember I got a book from a Hare Krishna when I was like 10.
They would get the majority of the recruits out of Ivy League schools, by the way. So we're not talking, this is not a matter of intelligence.
Right.
So they would recruit these kids, and you would hear about parents that would then pay Mr. So-and-so to drive up, grab their kid, pull, the kid saying, "No, help me, I'm being kidnapped," right? And they drive him off, and he's alone in a cabin with the guy, and he's helping to deprogram. And before you know it, the guy comes out of the cult. So he's an ex-Mooney, he's an ex-Hare Krishna. It's exactly the same thing. So let's say the cult family has your kid, and they will say, it's no longer your kid, this is our kid. And look at what's going on, legalized kidnapping, where you connect these perps, connect with kids online. They can take them across state lines now and then go through sex change. You can do it in California, right? You featured that in Montana, I think. So let's say the cult has your kid. If you try to get your kid back, they'll say, you are practicing conversion therapy.
Right.
That's why everybody should be very
even questioning what the child is saying is conversion.
That's right. So it is unduly influencing this kid, and the greatest way you impact a kid psychologically, mentally, emotionally is through their sex and sexuality. Right. And so perpetrators know it. So all the methods that are being employed in schools with all the deviant sex ed stuff is exactly what sexual perpetrators would use. As a matter of fact, and this should raise eyebrows, all the books that have the deviant pictures in them, by the way, you notice they are drawings, because if they were actually photographs,
it would be pornography.
And therefore the adults, any teacher, any administrator would be arrested. So the authors know they have to put the drawings in there, little cartoon drawings.
And to make it seem more benign.
Okay? And I'm here to tell you, if any of the guys in my sex offender treatment program were found in possession with any of those books, they'd be immediately failed out and sent back to prison. Why do you think?
Wait, I'm sorry. What was the question?
If any of
them had, because they're pornographic. The drawings are pornographic.
Okay, and why else?
Because it's stimulating.
And?
Because it's grooming. Because it's targeted towards children.
And what are they going to do with the material?
They're going to pleasure themselves to it and reinforce their own paraphilia.
And so if they have that book, what could they do?
Groom kids with it.
In what way?
Just give it to them and read it to them and walk them through
so the question is this: is it education going on, or is it grooming?
It's grooming.
There you go.
It's grooming. It's
the same material that would get a sex offender sent back to prison. Did
you see the videos of the mom? There was a mother, I don't know what state it was in, who confronted the school board with
they won't let her read it.
Of books, copies of books that were in the middle school library that were available for the children, and they escorted her out with security and refused to allow her to display the pictures on the books because they said it was inappropriate. It was inappropriate for an adult meeting at evening. School board meetings are usually like 7 p.m. on a Thursday night, and it's occupied by adults. But yet it's totally appropriate for kids to go check out themselves.
My response to any adult, any of the school board members that are giving pushback, It's time to check out their electronics, their hard drive, their financial transaction, and their phone's GPS. There's way too any adult, and this is really the first test you want to give. And this will bring us full circle back to Stella or anybody. Anybody who I call it leaning in or leaning away from. If you, let's say, hear from a sex offender treatment provider that he's got concerns about certain adults, most normal adults would say, you go, what? Tell me more.
Right. Tell me. Yeah. Right.
But if any adult, so this is a good test. Like somebody can go on, I've got a lot of different videos right on my YouTube channel about perpetrators and predators. If you want to find out whether or not you should have concerns about any adult as far as safeguarding, show them one of these videos and watch their response, because I'm a forensic treatment provider. I have over like 15,000 clinical contact hours dealing with sex offenders, right? To my right, I'm a research and clinical member of ATSA, Association of Treatment of Sexual Abusers. Okay. So I'm a clinical professional that has concerns about these different populations of men. If someone doesn't say, you mean a professional sex offender treatment provider has concerns about Bill Illy walking in? What? Okay, tell me why. Like, talk to me. I need to know. I want to keep people safe. But if their response is, oh, he's so, Euler's so, Euler's phobic. Okay, so I liken it to this. If anybody's seen the first movie, first part of the movie Jaws, the series of Jaws. So movie 1, I'm old enough, I remember when it came out in the theaters. Okay? The question is, why does anybody go see Jaws? Okay, but we all watched the darn thing, right? Okay, we know how there's going to be blood, but think about it, there really is a storyline in the movie Jaws. And if anybody thinks about the storyline, you start to have evidence that people are being harmed by a white shark over on the East Coast.
Right.
It was in Massachusetts or something. Well, who's the famous guy that is out to protect people? We have Sheriff Brody. Remember, Sheriff Brody is raising red flags, saying these waters are not safe. But then the town's mayor and his cadre of officials and lawyers are concerned about what? The almighty dollar. And it's coming up to the opening day of beach season. Right. And so you have these two interests that are clashing. And I often liken myself to, and I've used this as memes. So I have a picture of Sheriff Brody, the famous one where he's on the boat, he's looking in, he's looking to what, I think we need a bigger boat. So I've used that as a meme to what is my response when anybody says, oh, the trans movement is safe for kids, or furries is safe for kids, or now GenSpect has safeguarding for those that are attending. My response is time to get a bigger boat. So the question is this: who's raising concerns and what are their background, or what's their background and why? So as someone who has dealt with the criminal mind, as someone who is certified in the hair psychopathy checklist, as someone who has 15,000 clinical hours of contact with sexual predators, who's worked in a specialized forensic unit for sexually violent predators, as someone who currently has 5 sex offender treatment groups going on, I'm telling you this.
Right. And you're not making more money by making any of the, there's no incentive.
I've never monetized anything.
Right.
So I'm telling you this, as the Sheriff Brody, I'm looking in the waters and I'm telling you, any man that dresses in women's underwear and drag, in order to push limits or boundaries or access women and children, is already demonstrating strong predatory signs. And therefore, I will say this.
Well, it's just the tip of the iceberg.
Right. Was the night before. So whatever point in time you're meeting one of these guys. So Phil Illy, if you're listening, here's a dirty little secret. And Stella, you can respond to this. Phil Illy, I know what you're doing with your right hand 6 hours before you're dressing in drag and strutting your stuff at GenSpect.
Right.
And I know the kind of crap you're accessing on the dark web.
And probably even while he's reading through all of the
Absolutely.
comments.
What do you think he's doing at the table? As a matter of fact, I'll ask if somebody says, "Oh, Uhler, he's not dressed in women's underwear." I'll say, you know what? You may be right. Where were his hands at dinner time?
Right.
After dinner?
When
You
he's
think, right? You think I'm kidding.
bathroom.
And
I'm
then I ask people this, Stella, how many years have you worked with sex offenders?
Right.
Oh, these aren't sex offenders. Okay, now I'll ask this question. What do you call a pre-arrested sex offender?
I don't
Let
know.
it sink in. Or is
I
not
don't-
a sex offender correct? So prior
oh,
to
you're
all
right.
that,
So yeah, they're not considered sex offenders.
what do you call a guy that tomorrow he's going to be arrested for a sex offender? What does he look like today?
Right. Totally.
Okay. And I'm telling you, if I have a hard time identifying him,
Right. Right.
Stella's clueless, but now she's not clueless. She's defending it. So I'm telling you, any of these guys that dress in women's underwear and drag and are in the trans movement, why are they there? Where else would you go to access the most vulnerable populations and to have to put it out there and play people for fools? They fancy themselves. Psychopaths love game theory. It's always strategy. Why? Because they're trying to access kids, but long before that, they get a high. It's almost like the hors d'oeuvre to play good people for fools. And that's why the perps, for instance, will look for single women with kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why? They want the kids, and they're going to play
the mom is vulnerable.
But in a public setting, it's a little different. That's why they love going to church, because they love putting it right out there, and they know what they're getting over on all these adults, and they're just seeing how stupid the adults are. So
wait, John, I gotta let my dog is. Let me let my dog in. Keep going. I can hear you.
Okay, and as a matter of fact, if anybody has any questions, I've been all over the place today. I really need to get energetic about this. Okay, saying something off. So, let's see. AGPs are dangerous. Yes, they are, and they know it. Okay, the ones that aren't are the ones that you never hear about, right? And the question is this: with an AGP guy, why aren't they in clubs? Right? They don't need to be accessing women and children, and they know it, by the way. Oh, and why are they in sports? Why are they in women's sports? It's not for medals, by the way. Why do you think? Okay, they love denying, because porn creates a malevolence deep within the heart of a man. That's why they think it's a reasonable option to place their hands on the throat of a woman, and that's already meaning a guy's becoming deviant. Okay, they're doing it to deny women the medals, but that's not the real reason they're doing it. Is to gain access to where? Right. And you want to find that out, deny them access to the changing room, and then all hell is going to break loose. And they always have what? They always have their cell phone. Okay. So that's why all these deviant guys, Leah Thomas and others, okay, they're accessing the locker rooms. That's what they're doing. They're traumatizing. We've heard Riley Gaines and some of the other female swimmers talk about how they had to disrobe. And it's going to mess them up as far as their ability to concentrate, because they're being traumatized or re-traumatized. So that's what this is all about. All these deviant guys know that. And that's why, again, any AGP, come on my program. We'll have a little discussion, right? We'll help you be able to have a platform to describe how much porn you consume, okay, and what kind. And we all know what kind. So, okay, let me see if I have any questions I can answer here. So there we go. How do you view AGPs? These are just sexually deviant guys that are accessing tons of porn. They've been doing it for years. The porn has progressed. They're heinous. As a matter of fact, the kinds of porn inevitably found on these different back channels that these guys have is very horrific. And I mean, they show women's bodies being dismembered. I mean, horrifically violent stuff. So people need to understand these men are dangerous to women and children. They should never be around, and they know it. And that's why, Stella, you're inviting very dangerous men onto the premises. So you tell me as a psychotherapist how sensitive that is. So stop caring about sexually deviant men. Start standing up for women and children.
Thank you. Amen. And it's like, my thing is, I don't understand. It's like, they don't understand. Like, okay, I don't know if you saw recently, if you're familiar with like P Diddy, like formerly known as Puff Daddy. He's the rapper and producer who used to work with like Biggie Smalls back in the day, and he's worth like hundreds of millions of dollars at this point. and they just dropped a lawsuit on him. There have been rumors for years and years and years that he had been into a lot of weird sort of Jeffrey Epstein type stuff, but a lot of like, sort of like homosexual stuff and stuff with like, sort of like grooming people trying to enter the industry. These new producers or rappers, and they'd have to like go through him first, and he would sort of bring them to these sex parties and
casting couch, Weinstein, right?
Exactly. Yeah, the Weinstein stuff. Right.
Business, absolutely.
And so the thing that people, I feel like they need to really understand is these men can be these highly accomplished, highly well-connected. That's not a conspiracy. This idea that we say there's like, the pedophile ring, and they try to cast it as this like, bizarre conspiracy theory. But as more comes to light, it's true. It's these, if you look at WPATH, the board of WPATH is entirely occupied by highly, accomplished men who have degrees. Yeah, and they're extremely deviant.
Can you share the screen? Can I bring up a
Yeah. Let's see. I don't know if I can share. You might have to send me. Are you able to send me which file is it? I don't know if I'm
actually. Where do you want me to send it to? Because I just created a chart. This is kind of hot off the press.
Can you send it to Twitter? Is that possible?
I'll drop it in right now. Okay.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, I'm doing a series with Emma Catherine on the Imagination podcast on the idea, dissociative identity disorder, and how therapists can work with that and the internal system.
Right.
And I thought it would be helpful because I was just interviewed about SRA, satanic ritual abuse, which is a thing I never believed in, but it's very real.
I saw you talking about
it's very real. So I thought it would be helpful for that interview, and therefore we just featured it. Emma and I did. I went through this chart. So this is hot off the press. So I want people to understand that in terms of psychopathy, and again, it's a fancy term that psychology has recently come up with. If you want to know the old-fashioned term for it, it's in the book of Proverbs and Psalms. It's called a fool. It's a really serious category. Okay, it means you have no conscience, therefore you have no empathy and no remorse. So what are you like if you reach a point, and it's not just male, by the way, right? And James Fallon, Robert Hare, his example of a white-collar psychopath was Bernie Madoff, head of the NASDAQ, who made off with everybody's money. James Fallon's example of a white-collar psychopath, and I totally agree, is Bill Clinton. So Bill and Hillary Clinton, this is not a political statement. This is not a political party. But if you want to have a modern day example of Ahab and Jezebel, it's Bill and Hillary. How can I say that? The most dangerous person to be is an FOB, friend of Bill, right? You're going to be on the receiving end of, you're going to die by being choked by a red scarf in the shower or by a doorknob, Anthony Bourdain notwithstanding.
Wow.
So the one thing to understand about a psychopath, and again, there are two kinds, the bloody psychopath and the white-collar psychopath. The bloody psychopaths, the snatch and grab kind, the creep that's in the trench coat, driving around the park, the stranger danger. It's very few, and this is graphic, but their body count is going to be relatively small, and I'm not minimizing any of that. Okay, they'll have 10 people, 20 body count. A white-collar psychopath, they'll have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and they are the ones to get themselves in positions of power. Now, Robert Harris said that a psychopath, the more psychopathic, the more impulsive. That is not true. The more antisocial, that is not true. And he himself, right, if he said he would study them in Wall Street, it shows you that, and this is what people need to understand. Aside from the bloody psychopath, and that's the impulsive one, that's the antisocial one, but it doesn't necessarily, because Ted Bundy, nobody picked him out from a crowd. Jeffrey Dahmer, before they found the freezer, right? Nobody identified it. So the psychopath does not necessarily look like a freak. And for the white-collar psychopaths, what people need to understand is this. The more psychopathic somebody becomes, the more normal they appear and the more sophisticated they get. That's why they rise into politics and places of influence and heading up children and youth or Department of Children and Family Services and heading up government agencies where you can allow 82,000 migrant or unaccompanied minors to go missing. That's not by accident. So Jeffrey Epstein did not look abnormal. Okay, Bill Clinton does not look abnormal. Henry Weinstein, he's an ugly guy, but he was in a position of power. So the more a psychopath develops his skills, that's why they end up becoming pastors. They end up becoming psychologists. They end up becoming academic researchers. They end up becoming Larry Nassar of the Olympics, right? Perping on all these girls. So the best way to understand who we're talking about, and Stella, if you're listening and watching, I'm going to show you where Phil Illy is. Phil, I'll show you where you are. And if you don't like where I'm going to put you on this chart, then you know what? Come on and we'll talk about it.
Let me see.
Okay. So the best way to view this is moving from left to right. And these are different things these are different aspects of someone. And so you have a building, it's a snowball-like effect. So so these are, how do you create a sexual psychopath, or how do you create a psychopath? But then how do you create a sexual psychopath? Because you can have a financial psychopath, right? They run Wall Street. Okay, so this is how you create a pedophile. This is how you create a sexual psychopath. So it starts out with lust. It starts out with a guy's going to be impulsive. He's going to be egocentric. This is a guy that starts to get into porn. This is a guy that's all about himself. This is a guy that's going to take advantage of going out on a date. It's not really planned in the sense that he's not trolling. He's not purposely looking for women. This is a college guy that is going to college. He has a major, but then he starts noticing, or he's checking out women on campus. He goes out on a date, and as they say, he's laying a bunch of women. These are the frat house guys, right? This is society, sadly. Okay, so that's why if you go all the way down, if you see sociopath and psychopath, again, my premise says one eventually bleeds into the next, pardon that pun. So society really, and the legal end of things picks up where really coercion kind of starts, so to speak. So that's kind of where, when we think in terms of sex offending, you're not going to see laws come into play until about that third box up at the top there. So impulsive, manipulative, that's welcome to society. That's how sad.
Coercion. You're talking about these boxes,
right? There you go. So right about there is, when we're talking about sex offending, it's going to start right there. Well, look what's already happened then. If you were to pull that box straight down, Brittany, you're doing that exact, good for you, right? It started to do, you can actually grab the bottom of it and stretch it all the way down. So look at where sociopathy, or look at where the sociopath starts prior to offending.
I see. So around manipulation.
There you go. So which means, how many sociopaths are out there in society? A ton. Now look at the very bottom, when I tried to show the overlap of the degree of trauma, and the more trauma and the earlier, because what's going to happen is this: as a guy is moving from left to right, I'm going to add to this chart the kind of pornography the guy is going to be accessing.
Yeah.
It's going to start small at gateway, and it's going to move. Okay. By the time,
just real quick to jump in, it's interesting you don't overlap the impulsive and egocentric. And I actually find that, I don't know if you ever saw, I had a debate with Exelanzic. Do you know who Exelanzic is?
I've never met her personally, but I've
so Sierra, days after the GenSpect conference, she was actually planning to head to my house. She was taking a train across. So a few days after, we hung out, she spent a few days with me. And so I had time to sort of talk with her and debrief the whole GenSpect conference back in November. And we did a live stream together, and we ended up having a debate on the live stream about sort of, why these men act out the way that they do. And she had a theory that these men, when they decide to cross-dress, when they decide to engage in this behavior, that they're dissociative and dissociated, and they're not able to control their behavior. It's become so impulsive that they're literally psychotic. That because of that reason, it's thank you. My position was that's absurd. Exactly. And she's basically saying that it's like it's a disability. Yeah. In that sense, that they have no control over what they're doing.
Right. That's 100% a myth. And I understand, right? But what I would say to Sierra is this: it's not going to be a sexist statement, but I'm going to say two things. You're a female and you've never worked with sexual predators. So you're surmising, which is very dangerous in this sense. Think about the movie Jaws. If you're saying these waters, oh, I know it's a little fin, but after all, it's not really fin. It's just a happy little shark and he won't bother you. And okay. So, right. And we're talking about guys, if they stay in the club, we're not talking about those kind of guys, right? The only reason we're talking about AGPs is these are the guys that came out of the club and they want to have access to women and children's spaces. That's the only reason we're talking about this. Nobody would have heard the term. So I'm also not talking about the guys that are not an issue.
And it makes sense. And also when you think about the fact that, you know, prior to this whole cultural explosion of, you know, LGBTQ, trans acceptance and all this sort of stuff, this was a very fringe minority that was kept in these very specific 100%. Spaces. And now, obviously, now that, you know, so it's just to say that they have no control over their behavior, that it just happens to them.
They are opportunists.
Absolutely.
Okay? And that's a sociopath. Okay. So let's talk about a financial sociopath. Folks, when you go onto a car lot, and I'm not getting down on car salespeople, but think about it. Why do people hate going car shopping? And why did online car shopping come about? Because they knew people used to hate going to the car lot. If you look for a new car, what is it? She does a lot. Okay. So think about when you go onto a car lot, I'll tell you what's happening. You're being financially objectified. You're being financially groomed. You're being financially profiled. Right. I'll tell you the ones they look for. Right. If you tell them, oh, I'm not here to buy anything, I'm just looking, they're going to spend more time with you because they know that you're actually looking. But if you say, oh, you know what, I'm really looking, and here's what, they're not going to spend as much time. So they already know
exactly what you want, and you already have.
Right. And they know. And so the most successful financial sociopaths are the ones that will upsell you, and you'll actually give them a 5-star rating on the review that you will get after your transaction. You'll actually give the dealership, your experience was wonderful, and
you'll get ripped off and report a great experience.
You're right. You were sorry. I'm going to be graphic. You were financially screwed. You were a cheap date, and you gave them high ratings. Now, I'm not. I used to work for CarsDirect.com as far as dealer management when it started back in the 90s. So I have nothing against cars, but we all understand. As a matter of fact,
you go pretty hard on the car salesman, John.
I know, okay. But like the Taylor Johnson temperament analysis test, the TJTA has a profile that's called the used car salesman. We used to call it the snake oil salesman. Well, nobody understands what that is. That was when the West was being settled. You would have a guy pull in with a Calistoga wagon back in the, the wagon, the 49ers and so he would pull into town, he would drop the side, he had a hinge, and so the side would come down, it looks like a display case, and he would sell the magic elixirs, and he would stand in the middle of the street, come on, we have the magic, do you have ailments, and you can go online, apparently there was even a film called Snake Oil Salesman, right? Do you have arthritis, rheumatism? This little bottle. Now it's clear. It's got liquid. This is the miracle cure. Now we call it infomercials. Okay.
And how many people do you think took it and came back and said that it worked wonders?
Okay, there you go. Right. And so you have the people, oh, it did. And then the next best snake oil.
I'm a believer. Right?
That's it. Is in the charismatic. I was healed. And half of them are frauds. All of them are frauds. Okay. So they've learned the art. So that's why the psychopath, whether the financial psychopath or the sexual psychopath, their number one place of target of opportunity are churches.
Right.
Number one. That's my greatest concern. The next is the trans movement.
And do you think the churches is because of the level of a sort of trust and community and the sense that we all embrace each other?
Greatest pool of people. And here's the other piece. Because they can get a chuckle out of it. And now let that sink in. That's what the psychopath turns around. So think about whether politics, it's the momentary, and Bill Clinton was caught on camera. It was very artful. coming out of the funeral of Ron Brown. Ron Brown was the Secretary of Commerce whose plane just happened to explode. Supposedly it was thick fog, but the radar indicated it was clear. Okay, so he was murdered.
Wow.
In Turkey. So Bill Clinton, so Ron Brown was Bill Clinton's Secretary of Commerce, but he knew too much.
Right.
Okay, so he's murdered. So Bill Clinton goes to the funeral. Tony Campolo, who's from Philly, I believe, was the faith-based point person. Well, they're coming out of the side door. So there's a clip. I've seen the film clip of this. So you have, of course, presidents going to Ron Brown's funeral. So you would have a cadre of media around the church. They didn't come out the front way. They came out the side, maybe security, who knows. As Tony Campolo and Bill Clinton are walking side by side, it would make sense. Bill's sitting with a clergy, a pastor. Well, the camera crew is to Bill Clinton's left. Tony Campolo is on the right. Therefore, Bill is, no, I'm sorry, the other way around. The reason that's important is this. Bill had evidently just been cracking a joke or something. So Tony Campolo, so here they come, they're now in eye shot. Tony Campolo is obviously following up this conversation, whatever's being said by Bill. Bill's chuckling, Tony Campolo's chuckling. Bill glances at the camera, and in a split second, it's artful. He's chuckling, and all of a sudden he looks, he goes, and that pouty face. Tony Campolo doesn't know what's happening. He looks at Bill like, what? And all of a sudden he glances over and he goes, oh, puts his head down. That's the art of the psychopath. It's the art of being able to screw somebody over, allow them to like it, allow them to thank you, and you turn around and say, what a bunch of putzes. Okay, that's the fun. That's why do guys want in women's sports, as I mentioned, as you were attending to your dog, right? It's not to deny the medals. That's fun, that's sport. That's the hors d'oeuvres for them. They don't care. They're getting access to the private spaces, the locker rooms and shower rooms to traumatize them, and they have their cameras. That's the real deal. And what are they doing? They're uploading and downloading the stuff, making cash profit off of it. Plus, they know they're traumatizing. So Leah Thomas, the sexually deviant male who had heinous stuff on his other Twitter account, as far as really violent drawings and things of women being harmed, he knew he was traumatizing. So that's what the psychopath wants. So it's toying. It's that they fancy themselves as chess masters because that's the psychopath. So that's half the fun for them. So that's why they love going into places. Phil Illy, he's loving going in. He's traumatized. He knew. He's scanning the room. He's looking at the discomfort, and this is where. Oh, your volume. You've muted yourself.
Sorry, I did take it off. Sorry. Yeah. I was saying it's like you said, not just the getting in, but then being welcomed. And then clearly there's half the people who are totally uncomfortable, feel like they can't say anything. But then when you have all the organizers of the conference coming and saying, hello, Phil, taking photos of him, posting the photos up, he's handing his books out.
Facilitating everybody else being traumatized by this.
He's getting 100. How many different interviews did he get? It was so funny because I was laughing about Julia Malott, who was another trans-identifying male.
And Julia ran his mouth. Mr. Julia ran his mouth, but won't debate me. None of these guys debate me. Come on to my program. Any of you cross-dressing, deviant, women's underwear wearing guys, come on to my program. We'll have a little talk. We're going to talk two things. We're going to talk safety of women, safety of children. You're going to talk about how and when you got into pornography, how it's progressed, and when you started wearing women's underwear and where you get it from. Don't tell me you buy it. And we're going to talk about your ability to identify, and you're going to tell me about the 9 red flag key clinical indicators of sexual abuse and how you are able to discern the difference.
Amen. And they won't. They're afraid. And it's like Julia Malott was crying, basically whining about the fact that Phil Illy he was like, I had a photo too. It just didn't go as viral.
And that Julia deviant guy is doing, talking about the breastfeeding. Okay, so that's child abuse. Mr. Julia, you come on this program now. Brittany will host it, and we're going to talk about how deviant you are, how despicable. So you're going to take a vulnerable infant, and at the very least, but we know the kind of porn you've been accessing, you deviant.
Steal it from its mother.
This child is hungry, and you're doing what? You're toying with this child. So not only are you abusive, you're a lying little piece of whatever. So come on,
terrifies
have a
me.
debate.
We did a protest against the American College of Obstetrician Gynecologists, and the fact that it's just captured at every level shows the level of influence that you have these authority on birthing and breastfeeding women saying, yeah, it's totally reasonable and normal that trans women are
that are the predators. They welcome it. So 100% of these men, so you look at one of these women's underwear wearing men that are breastfeeding these kids. What do you think they were doing with those same hands 6 hours earlier?
I know.
What do you think they were looking at?
I know.
Probably, quite possibly, a child being raped. And now I got it in their hands. Why am I so against these men doing surrogates? Number one, talk about objectifying women. So you're using these women.
And objectifying children, like it's just an object to be bought and sold, and women.
How many stories have we already found? Not that I needed the stories, but now there's plenty of stories talking about that these guys are using these kids. It's a front for child.
It's a way to get your hands on a child that no one. It's now your kid. You could do whatever you want.
And they're trafficking these infants.
Jesus fucking Christ. Yeah. And it's without the female, the gatekeeping quality of female sexuality, of having to, a mom who would be like, whoa,
there's no safeguarding in those homes. All these kids are being trafficked.
None. And it's, so
by the way, all the sex offenders know this. They cannot believe, all the guys in my groups, they cannot believe how stupid the public is.
Thank you. And that's the thing. It's the gullibility. So let me ask you a question, John. What are your thoughts? Can we judge people based off of what they're wearing, or is that 100%. Wrong? Is it that
100%? Right. And it's not judging them. Okay, it's assessing the fact that they are twofold. One, they're so self-entitled as to not care, but all these guys know. So any man, so everybody needs to really hear this. And any of you perps out, any of you deviant men that want to debate me, come on my program. We'll talk about it. You cannot tell me. So it is not reasonable to be so naive as to believe that any guy that thinks it's a reasonable proposition to wear women's underwear has not been fully saturated in years worth of progressive porn. Think about that chart that prior to dressing in women's underwear. If my wife were, she were to say, hey, you know what? I just want to see what these look like. Put these on. Do you know what I would say to her?
Right.
Like, what?
Yeah.
Put on your underwear? No.
It's just the tip of the iceberg. What people don't understand is if this is what they're doing out in public, if they're already to the point that they will behave this way in public, you have no idea what goes on below that surface.
So they're playing the public for fools. Stella's being played, and that's the best case scenario. But Stella, I do not believe you're that ignorant. Because
you've heard all
I say that? Because you and Michael Bailey and you had Canner on your program. So now the question is this: what's your fascination, Stella? Why are you now driven to support men that are either pushing or have given evidence that they represent that which is of threat to vulnerable women and children? Why are you now helping to facilitate those things that will place women and children in harm's way?
Well, because if it was innocent, when we brought the concerns, she would be really genuinely interested to hear them. She shut them down instantly. She knows that they're coming, and she comes up with a campaign to discredit whoever it is, and she shuts it down.
She blocked me.
She tried to sue me. I was like, okay.
Yeah. Right. And I was going to be decent to her. I was just going to ask some very straightforward questions. Like, Stella, you know what he's into.
Right.
How can you say that? You do a great imitation. How can you, what is he into? How can you say that? Well, okay, I'm a guy. What percent of the male population accesses porn, just in general, Stella? We're talking 90%. I don't know, 98%. Okay. Right. So that's of men.
Right.
Okay. Now, how many men appear deviant out there? Not as many. Okay. So How many access porn? Virtually all of them. Okay. So if a guy starts to act sexually deviant, maybe we can assume he's part of that population accessing it. And the stuff he's accessing at least mirrors what he's acting out. So therefore, we can say he's a regular consumer of progressively deviant porn. So Stella, why do you have sexually deviant men at your conferences when you have survivors that were so traumatized and in a dissociative state, therefore, and have multiple diagnoses, and a lot of them probably have dissociative identity disorder, where a part of them hated their breasts, wanted them removed. So you have now facilitated that which will trigger them.
Right.
Sexually deviant males, you facilitated that into a conference of sexually traumatized young people.
Right.
That's sick.
What is your response to like those who say, for example, like with the minor attractive persons push, right? That whole thing.
Right. These
I'm
are just
trying to rebrand it and all this sort of stuff. But for those, and I've had even people come onto this channel and challenge me. They're like, no, but how do you expect us to really be able to fight it if we don't fully understand? We need to do this in order to study it, so that we can understand it better. We can see the nuance and you know, what is your response to that?
I would first say this. Does it, to that person that would say that, does it bother you to know that you've just really verbalized almost verbatim exactly what sex offenders say about why they needed to access porn? So the justification or rationalization, number one. Okay. Is any perpetrator ever going to come out with what they're doing? No, they're liars.
They're
liars. So you're taking the words of, and now you've aligned yourself with those men that have given evidence that they saturate themselves in pornography behind closed doors.
Right.
You're coming to the defense of porn-saturated men. Why are you driven to do that?
Right.
Number one.
And I think
pedophiles, nobody's born that way. Nobody's minor attracted. Okay. It always starts. Now I'm going to tell you as a clinical.
So it's not a sexuality opposed to what they try to say.
So I'm now going to put on my forensic 15 years worth, my forensic hat. I'm going to tell you how somebody becomes a pedophile. Ready? So here's the truth. They start with adults, the men. And if you look at that chart again, the pornography always starts with adults. So when a guy says, well, I realized I've always been attracted to kids. Ready? He's lying.
Right.
No, but he seems so sincere. What did you just say? He seems so, he's a perp. Why wasn't he arrested the day before? Because nobody figured it out. Why?
At that time, he was
normal. Right. We're talking about the sophisticated ones. How do we know? Because they didn't get busted yet. How do you know if they're sophisticated or not? It really comes down to this. Look at the reaction on the part of those around him that knew him once he got busted. We're not talking the creepy guy where the news crew goes out to the neighbors and they say, hey, this guy was, arrested. And all the neighbors say, we knew it. He's a creepy guy. We told kids to stay away. No, it's the guy that says this. What? Mr. So-and-so, Dr. So-and-so? No, Dr. So-and-so, no, it can't be him. Okay. Well, yeah, it's him. And he's been perping for years. He was found with how much child rape porn and nobody knew. He was a mandated reporter. Look at, here it is. Look at Benjamin Levine. You want to find out how deviant these guys are. Benjamin Levine was the Secretary of Education, was head of the province of Ontario. Doctor, right? He headed up the education ministry. He was the one to bring in SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity, all the deviant books. He was found to be a horrific pedophile in terms of the amount that was on his devices. And then he got out. So that's why they want to push the destigmatizing, because it affects public opinion, public policy, laws, judicial opinions. He benefited from, meaning if and when they get busted, they can get out of prison earlier.
Right.
So that's why, by the way, they go to James Cantor and the other sexologists. Why do these guys go?
That's why it all got force teamed with, the LGBT movement, where it's this idea that, again, it's like this, it's who somebody is and it's born this way. And then it starts to push out. It starts with that sort of core.
And it's 100% a lie. It's all a lie. Okay. I'll tell you how a guy becomes a pedophile. They're not born that way. It's not brain structure. It's nothing. I'll tell you what it is. It's deviance. You allow yourself to start as a guy, you start crossing sexual boundaries, you will morph into various stages. Now, ever since the 70s in pornography, you will never find a sex offender, let alone a pedophile.
But you create those neural connections
That's
by
exactly right.
engaging in it. And you strengthen them every time you pleasure yourself to that idea. You start to strengthen that neural connection that you created.
And that's why people need to understand 100%, this without exception. In this day and age, 100% of all pedophiles are busted with child rape porn. 98%, give or take, they are busted with the distribution or dissemination of it because they know, they're passing it along. So whether they're a part of a group or they know separate individuals, 100%, you will never find an exception. So these are not mild guys. And by the way, there's a myth out there that the pedophiles became pedophiles because they themselves were perped on. That is a lie. How can I say it? Because I work with these guys. So I'll tell you an easy way to understand this. If you want to do reliable research on men that have been perped on, you don't go to the sex offender unit in prison, and none of these academic researchers have access to that kind of unit. They only have like 3 hours with individual guys. Okay. You're not going to interview guys that are on the sex offender unit. Where are you going to interview them? On the drug and alcohol unit. True survivors become protective rather than exploitive.
Right.
And they don't push boundaries. When you look at anybody that has been perped on as a kid, so you look at an adult survivor, they're hypervigilant for perps in order to protect kids. They don't justify and rationalize and they raise safeguarding bars, right? Anybody that's had a parent, like let's say a mother, anybody that knows if their mother was perped on, what typically you'll hear from the adult, it's like, oh man, I couldn't do anything when I was a kid because my mom was, forget a helicopter parent. She was so protective. She was overly protective.
Right.
So they're hypervigilant rather than exploitive. So that's what you look for, number one. So that's why anybody that's going to push boundaries and try to convince other people to lower their safeguarding, they were not perped on, and they haven't got clue one, or they're doing it on purpose. So that's the greater concern, and Stella can answer some of those questions.
Jeez. It's just like, what do you think like the goal is with what do you think GenSpect, what are they doing? Like, what is their goal? And do you have any thoughts on who might be like funding them, or to what extent are these academics like these sexologists men, like what sort of like power they wield? I think something that you said earlier that is really interesting and that I absolutely agree with, and I've sort of come to myself, it's that it's not necessarily like when we talk about how these things are starting to evolve, it's not like a group of these scary, shady individuals meeting in a room and saying, here's the conspiracy, guys. Here's how we're going to do it. It starts off as like a rat king of different people with different interests, and they all start to realize that their interests are somewhat convergent, and that, they both want different things, but it'll have the same sort of pathway to get there. So it's worthwhile to work together. And it's like, even this concept that like GenSpect, for example, is a W path controlled opposition. That doesn't mean that Stella O'Malley one day was like, I'm going to start an organization that's going to become the controlled opposition to GenSpect, and it's going to neuter the gender critical movement from really taking out the gender industry. I think that these things sort of evolve into what they are, and it doesn't make them less, like organized towards that goal. It's not as simplistic as just being like, here's exactly what we're going to do. It just evolves towards that. I think she realizes that there's, as people are leaving this far left, as the far left, affirmation only model is getting exposed for being the sort of unhinged thing that it is. It's only natural now that they're going to need some sort of a life raft, because the natural response, if this was left, is going to be the gender critical response, and it's going to end up wiping out the gender industry because it's going to expose how insane and dangerous it is. But there's too much investment. There's too much money. There's too much money yet to be made still. This is a cash cow. They're not just going to hand it over and let it get, wiped out. So the next move is, okay, we have to acquiesce to some of the concerns. We have to look like we're listening, look like we care. We see that they're really upset about childhood transition. We're going to make that the focus, and try to still preserve some of what this industry can do. Say, well, adults should be able to do what they want. And this becomes the balance. This becomes the compromise. And that's how I've seen sort of what, GenSpect has evolved into. And to me, it's so interesting how vigilant they are at shutting down people who don't want to just stop there. And it's fine if adults do it, and we'll, invite all of these different, voices of people like Phil Illey and Cantor and Bailey and Blanchard who are saying, no, that's not enough. We want to safeguard all the way with this whole industry. This gender industry needs to be abolished, not amended, not fixed, not, corrected. It needs to be abolished. It shouldn't have ever existed in the first place. So I guess my question is, it's like, what do you think GenSpect is trying to do?
Yeah. Brittany, and I've heard you reference, and actually you were the first person I heard, GenSpect or WPath Light, right? Mm-hmm. And you caused me to think through it, and you're 100% spot on.
Yeah.
I agree 100%. Now that raises that next question. Here's what I'm going to surmise. I think my perception of Stella, I'd never met her. Now she's blocked me. So right. She uses the term psychotherapist. I want people to understand it's just an erudite term. So I will now call myself a psychotherapist. I'm an insight-oriented psychotherapist. My clinical orientation would be object relations and now internal family systems with extended family systems therapy model. So because I'm an insight-oriented therapist, I could call myself a psychotherapist. So from one psychotherapist to another, she always calls herself a psychotherapist. I have more experience, clinical contact hours, with more populations than she does.
Right.
Why won't she talk to me?
Right. That's the concern.
It's blocked me.
Right. What if she's so interested in this marketplace of ideas and really getting to the core of things and letting everybody weigh in? That's not true, because she sets a very hard boundary. She won't set a hard boundary for these sexual deviants. No, we have to allow them a chance to speak. But she sets a very hard boundary against the so-called gender critical ultras. That should be a red flag to anybody.
That should be a massive red flag right there. Right. So I think your description's 100% spot on. So because she doesn't define herself, that's very specific. Okay. So we're left to look at her actions and who she is associating with. All I have to see is somebody who allows cross-dressing men into a conference where you're going to have former sexual abuse survivors to know something's up, especially as a therapist. You can't be that brain dead.
Right.
So you're either sadistic, you're either deriving a sadistic sense of satisfaction, or I'm going to use this in a clinical term, or you're a freak because you're doing bondage and BDS and being behind the scenes, and you think it's kind of cutting edge and nouveau at the
there has to be some sort of.
Okay, so you got some really weird stuff going on, because even with Debbie Hayton, from what I hear, and I've never seen it, so it's just the description of it, apparently she aligned herself with this porn accessing, cross-dressing dad who has a kid that was accessing at a very young age, wanting to cross-dress. That's a red flag. And she sort of marginalizes the wife. The affinity should be the other way.
Thank you. That's what I would say. Why wouldn't she team up with?
Okay, but she can see it. Now she's established a pattern of being, of aligning herself with, this harmonic convergence with sexually deviant men. That's a huge concern to me, because at the very least, there may be something behind the scenes that, that's on her. But when it comes to safeguarding, as a mandated reporter and as a therapist, you can't afford to be so ignorant, let alone blind, to the red flags of abuse and perpetration. That's my greatest concern right now about GenSpect. Now, the second is they're pushing the lie of trans. There's no such thing as trans.
Right, because some people are truly trans.
And you're never going to help a kid who's gender confused by focusing on their gender.
Right. Or putting them in contact with opposite sex impersonators.
Right? And so if you claim to be a therapist and you use the term trans, I'll tell you one thing, you're really ignorant.
Right.
I want to know, meaning Stella, come on, or any of these gender therapists, right? Come on my program and we're going to role play. You tell me how you assess for safety, how you assess for the red flags of child abuse, and you tell me, we'll do first session, we'll do about 10 sessions of role play. And I want to see how far you get with the kid. And then you be the kid. You're going to be oppositional, no doubt. And I'll show you how far I get with the kid. Right. So what they're showing me is this. They've never worked effectively with really severely emotionally damaged kids, which is this population. That should concern us all. So parents are taking kids to therapists, or they're going to GenSpect thinking they're going to find help. They're not going to find help. Right. We're going to find at best a Band-Aid approach. It's no time for Band-Aids. And then you allow the fox in the hen house. Now I've got real concern. Right. So I think it's now, what motivates her and where's the money coming from? I think there's money now. Where does it come from? See, I think your assessment is spot on. So then the next thing, all I had to see is this. You mean to tell me she features Bailey and Canner on a podcast? I'd never, I'll debate them. I'm not going to feature them like I'm interested in what they have to say. So that means she soft pedals. She features a guy that's the number one academic, the number one concern, the guy that's being used most strategically to push toward the legalization of pedophilia. Right. She should be pulling her hair out, but she featured the guy on a podcast. And not only
he's like one of their like board of advice. He's one of their advisors.
That was on Prostasia's board, and
the well is poison.
Michael Bailey that has the F saw that puts it up inside a woman.
Jesus.
Okay, and she does a paper with him. So I have massive concerns. And in Benjamin Boyce, I'm going to assume now that he's married to the therapist. You know what? Have me on your program, Benjamin, with your wife. We'll have a discussion about this. I want to know for your wife, I forget her name.
Leslie.
We're going to talk about how, Leslie, can you name off the red flags, the indicators of sexual abuse? Right? Doesn't this concern you about the fact that we're normalizing and we're legitimizing now the whole shift. We're legitimizing male deviance at the expense of vulnerable kids. So that's why I have huge concerns. And now the fact that GenSpect blocked me, it's like, whoa, what's going on?
I feel like they hide behind the intellectualism, this whole idea. Again, we talk about like the nuance and, it's just this complex thing. Crap. And that's meant to disarm people.
Don't you dare get right for anybody. Once they start, we don't understand the nuance. That's all I have to hear. There ain't no okay, here's what I had to ask them. I'm a sex offender treatment provider. Should I deal with nuances?
Well, why do we need to know why?
Maybe we don't understand because, after all, I'll tell you where I hear that term coming from the sex offenders, especially the child rapists. Well, you know what? You don't really understand because the nuance, and I wasn't getting it, and my wife wasn't, and, she was just so overpowering. She looks young, I know, age 8, but you don't know.
You only understood,
There you go. The problem is you're so black and white. You don't understand the nuances.
Right. It's more complex, and they're trying to make it sound.
I hear this all the time. You don't understand. I got the file in front of me. Oh, okay. So you raped 3 girls. You filmed it on the dark web. Well, Mr. Yale, I know what it looks like.
There's nuance.
Not that. Oh. Okay.
If only you understood all the details, John, then it would make sense.
That's right. All right, here it is. I was suffering with low self-esteem at the time, and I didn't know. And here's a classic one. We were at a hotel, and I was drinking a little too much, and I didn't realize I'd climbed in my stepdaughter's bed. I thought it was my wife.
Oh my God. That's so. Oh my God.
So I need to understand the nuances. So the only time I ever hear that is from perpetrators and their apologists.
Right. And I'm sorry, what do we have to learn from these men about why they do what they do?
Oh, yeah,
other than
Phil Lilly, the author.
No.
Yeah, Phil, come on my program. You know what, Phil? Show how
Tell us more about how to safeguard
Brittany,
against men
right?
like you.
You host the discussion between Phil and myself. So we'll invite Phil on here. Phil, you and I, guy to guy, pull up your big panties. Come on here. We'll talk.
Let's do it. Or yeah, even if you need Benjamin Boyce again, they didn't call you. Like they had to, of course, afterwards. I don't know if you saw the one interview. They had Rudy, who was kind of like on the GC Ultra side, and then it was Benjamin Boyce and Phil Illy against him, and it was like they were sort of teamed up. And Phil is all just sitting there, all like pompous, and he's like, "Yeah, I don't understand why you guys are getting so upset. Like, just relax. Like, maybe if you guys were more intellectual about it." It was like
brilliant. And as a matter of fact, nothing. I'm not going to criticize Stephanie Wynn, but I noticed that Stephanie had invited me onto her program, and she got sick, and I've never been.
Yeah. Stephanie Wynn's another one, and I hate to say, but a lot of, if you listen to even like Pamela Yeager, who I actually like the most of all of that whole GenSpect crowd, the Pamela Yeager, whatever, she I think is the most decent of all of them. But if you listen to a lot of them, they all used to peddle affirmation only. Now this is their way to kind of like, fix that and correct that, but they still want to work within the confines of it's like
that's right. And Brittany, any professional, any therapist, any mental health professional that uses the term trans, like trying to say there's such thing. Now I know I use the term trans inmate. Okay. But in reality, if someone actually says, if you tell me there are trans kids, then you're either brain dead, dangerously ignorant, or you are part of you're pushing something. There's no such thing as a trans kid. There are confused kids. There are manipulated kids. There are groomed kids. There's no such thing as a trans kid. 20 years ago, for us to accept this, and I don't accept it anyways, never in the history of medicine, in mental health, in psychology, psychiatry. When I was in my grad program, I graduated in 92. Okay, I've got a bunch I still look up top there. I got my textbooks. Okay, you flip through those. How many references to trans do you think you'll find? Zero.
Right.
It's just not an issue. You look at the rates.
Trans people have always existed, they tell me.
Okay, no, they have, right? And here's the reality. Where are you going to find them? At the very least, you're going to find them in residential treatment, meaning these would be the most damaged and broken of kids. Look at the Trevor Project, which is just the world's greatest target marketing scheme. And Sam Brinton, the criminal perpetrator that took women's underwear from the luggage from the airports, he was in a strategic position in the Trevor Project in West Hollywood. Where do all the runaway kids go who want to try to make it in music or movies? They go to West Hollywood. So it is, and mothers have faked being kids. They've called that line, and very quickly it's talking about trans stuff, talking about their sexuality.
Right.
So it is the perfect opportunity for predators. Sam Brinton defended Rent Boy magazine. That is a term. Rent Boy is a term for young male prostitutes over in Amsterdam.
Oh my God.
Okay, and that's why this same organization will, and everybody pushing this stuff, they push the misnomer of sex work.
Right.
In fact, some of them will tell these young girls, go onto OnlyFans or try prostitution so you can get enough money to get your breast sliced off.
Right. Yeah, and it's work. It's real work, and it's fine. And there's no, let's sprinkle some glitter on it and make it feel like a totally normal and benign experience that just all young women go through, cycle straight through. It's, and that's why I just even like him, and the fact that like Stella O'Malley tries to defend, they put the book, this is the Phil Illy book, up on, and the reason why I keep connecting it back to GenSpect, guys, it's just so that like we can try to it's for pattern recognition, so that we can recognize where in this broader gender critical movement where we're seeing these patterns of behavior that exist that are perpetuated by these perpetrators, that this isn't just some special unique phenomenon. This is the same story. It's the same strategy that they use in just a variety of different environments in a variety of different ways with new subjects, and they got to tweak and tailor a little bit. but it's the same story and it's to the same ends, right? It's for the self-gratification and the abuse.
Brittany, let me tell you my greatest concern. And then you'll see the concern about GenSpect. My greatest concern and my field of study, or what I focused on in my professional career, again, sexual abuse survivors, kids in the system, it's almost synonymous anyways, and now predators. So I understand those populations.
Yeah.
Those are all in play now in the trans movement.
Right.
All my radar is always up now for perpetrators. It's not that I see them behind every rock, but okay, I understand them.
Right.
When you see the way being paved for perpetrators, you need to be very concerned. So the question is this, and my greatest concern is the push to legalize pedophilia. The number one individual, in my estimation, in the world is James Canner. That's leading that. He's the most dangerous of all individuals because he sounds so good.
Yeah.
Who does Stella feature? The next person that backs him up and is part and parcel, and they do kudos to one another, is Michael Bailey. Stella has featured Canner and Bailey on episodes. So therefore, she is featuring, and now she did a research article with Michael Bailey.
What was the topic of the article?
It was on the prevalence of gender confusion among trans youth or something. Okay, so Stella now is hanging around she's publishing with two extremely deviant male sexologists that are paving the way for the acceptance and the normalization, destigmatization, and eventually the decriminalization of pedophilia. That should concern all of us.
And especially the fact that she kind of crosses wires. They originally started, this is what incenses me a lot. They started off as an organization positioned for vulnerable families of gender questioning children who were, they were at a critical point. The kids were on the brink of medicalization. They're desperate to help the kids. The only other option was like these, affirmation only organizations like Mermaids, and then they branded themselves. GenSpect came onto the scene, branded themselves as a refuge, like an oasis of reason for these families. And then she's going in and plugging in with these freaks like Cantor and Bailey. What are you doing?
Yeah, she's doing the bait and switch, as far as I'm concerned, because
and now she's saying, we're never a therapeutic organization. We just give out resources, and it's not the same.
No, they can flip flop. Think about Bill Clinton. Slick Willie. Okay, and
that's why she has no mission statement,
right?
So that she can just constantly move.
She doesn't intend to. Now I'm going to put on my think. I'm going to show you how a predator thinks. Okay, so if I were to be a predator and I were to think up the perfect crime, the perfect way to craft the perfect crime, it would be this. I want to be able to, like a magnet, almost like on the movie Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Remember that evil guy wants to collect all the kids? So he takes the little jail wagon and he makes it look like a carnival ride. And he comes into the town and he's saying, "Oh, children!" So he's drawing them out. He's instead of, "I have little snickerdoodles," and they go, "What?" Okay, so to pull off the perfect crime for a perp, you want to be able, like a magnet, to draw the most vulnerable and naive. How do you get that? You override intuition. That's what predators always do. They have no conscience, so the only thing left in terms of boundaries is the other person's intuition. Cults, manipulators, predators, perpetrators, pigs, dogs, fools, all of them, they go after intuition. Intuition is the reality testing part of us. It says, you know what, I may not have all the details, but something that, we call it sixth sense, something's not right. What predators do, and so you see this in GenSpect going on, as far as the methods, you see it in the trans movement, is this. Predators will always, in one way or another, they're always doing this because they have no conscience. So they're not stopping themselves. They want what they want. They're psychopathic. So the only thing left to stop them is you. Right. So the perpetrator, as they're getting closer and closer, crossing moral lines, and your intuition is kicking up, and abused women, this will recognize the same thing in domestic violence. It goes like this. the victim of opportunity or the target of opportunity will eventually start to say, hey, this, so to start to give a little pushback, and the perpetrator, the oppressor, the cult leader, the manipulator will always give the message of this. Well, no. I know what it looks like, but it's really not that.
Right.
That's going to disarm intuition. Once the intuition has been disarmed, the gates are down, there's no defenses. Now I have access. Now that's bad enough, because now I'm able to pilfer, plunder, I can do anything because you're not stopping me.
Right.
But the psychopath isn't going to stop with that. The psychopath, because again, it's the effect, and it's the thrill of the hunt and the chess match. They fancy themselves as chess masters. It's all about game theory. Okay. The psychopath knows that mission is accomplished, not just when all the boundaries are down and you're letting me come into the private spaces, literally, figuratively. So I've accomplished, because you're no longer saying, well, no, I'm saying it. I know what it looks like, but it's really not that. We're now going to take it to the next level. I, as the manipulator, perpetrator, cult leader, know when it's mission accomplished and I have you in the palm of my hands. When I hear you tell somebody else, where you pick up where I leave off, somebody from the outside says, hey, that Uhler guy, I'm not one, right? But I'll just use that Uhler guy. It sure seems like when you pick up where I left off, and when I hear you say, well, I know that you have concern, but it's really not that.
Right.
Now you're defending being in the cult.
Right.
That's the trans movement.
Right.
So those are the useful idiots, but those are the damaged kids. So look at what happens when any of us try to say the trans movement is a cult. The hordes will come out. As a matter of fact, the other times you'll see that reactivity, you talk about furries. By the way, furries is
people have been asking. It's fine. Sorry, just people keep bringing up furries in the chat, and like a few people said, "Ask me about furries."
I'll tell you exactly about furries. Okay, first time I heard about furries, never heard about furries. For anybody that wants to know, well, I'm dealing with a really heinous child predator who was getting out. I couldn't stop him because he went through somebody else's sex offender treatment. So he was days away, but I was still supposed to do the psychopath. So I thought, dang it, because I've kept 19 heinous sex offenders in prison. It takes a lot of work if they've been given green light through the prison system.
Yeah.
And they've done all their programming. Okay, so I knew I couldn't really stop the guy. So I figured I'm going to bleed him for information, so to speak. So you kind of know how to work it, and you build their ego up. And I said, I said, I talk to parents a lot, and it seems like you really were around a lot of these deviant guys, and you probably got a lot of some of the inside scoop. So I'm wondering, like, if I'm talking to parents, like, what should I tell them to look out for? And, because you're probably the expert. So what would be some of the things I could tell them? He says, oh yeah. He says, well, it's furries. I said, I'm staring at him. He says, furries. He says, furries. And I'm staring. He says, you don't know what furries are, do you? I said, I never heard of them. He says, like mascot kind of things, like at Disneyland and at sporting. I said, yeah. He says, well, that's a furry. Jesus. I said, Disneyland? He said, no. He said, what happens is you buy a costume and then there's conventions. And I said, you get in the costume? He says, yeah. I said, oh, it has a hood on. He said, yeah. I said, that hides all your identity. He says, yeah.
Not unlike trans.
And we access kids. He says, ready? He says, it's amazing, Mr. Uhler. He says, in every other setting in life, people will be very guarded with their kids. But you dress up in a costume, they will hand you their kids.
Wow. And
you look at their own in Wikipedia thing, they themselves acknowledge that 98, 99% of the men not only access porn on a regular basis, of course they do, but bestiality porn.
Wow.
That group has rebranded bestiality into zoophilia. And a concern I just posted on my Twitter page, somebody sent me it, the 43rd APA, and I forget which section it is, but the APA is going to hold a upcoming training conference in April. And of the speakers and workshops, so of the workshops they're having, one, and the theme is it's all destigmatizing sex and sexuality, deviant stuff. One is you read in the words, they're destigmatizing incest and destigmatizing bestiality.
Jesus Christ.
That's
Yeah, I don't know
one
if
of
you
the
just saw, they just
issues.
came out with a new, there's like the sex offender dolls, like those dolls that are supposed to be therapeutic. One of my earliest videos was talking, they had like, these silicone dolls that are hyper lifelike. And they've actually found that, these perpetrators will actually send in photos of children in their lives that they know, send them to have these custom dolls made so that they can abuse. And the whole concept is, oh, it'll lessen their
That's
risk
what
of
Cantor says. As a matter of fact, here's what James Cantor defends. Okay, and I can tell anybody this: sex dolls and sex bots, and that 3D, those 3D goggles.
Yeah, the
They
virtual
will
reality.
always supercharge deviant sexuality.
Thank you.
100%. It's
just understanding
100%
basic
guaranteed.
addiction.
How do I know? I work with predators.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so it is a lie. Anybody that's pushing that, you ask them, where do you work? Who have you worked with? How many hours have you worked with sexual predators? In what way? Don't tell me you've worked with them on an outpatient basis outside of a prison. You ain't getting no information. So all you're getting is self-report. So isn't it interesting? Here's what James Cantor pushes and downplays. He pushes the destigmatization. Now, she is Stella. Okay, Michael Bailey and Cantor are really professionally aligned with one another. Stella just wrote an article
do a lot of work
with
together.
Michael Bailey. Stella has featured Michael Bailey and Cantor on her podcast. Michael Bailey, these are some of the things he pushes. The harmlessness, the non-offending pedophile, that is a lie. Any pedophile, the only time they're non-offending is when they haven't been busted yet. Okay?
Right.
There's no such thing as a non-offending pedophile. There's no such thing as a minor attracted. Nobody's attracted to a child's body. It is men that have gotten into deviant lust and they want to violate, they want to traumatize, and they want to damage. Okay.
Yeah.
They are violating kids. That's what they get off on.
Jesus
Okay. That's what a pedophile is. And it starts with adult. And every pedophile knows they all start with adult images and they eventually start to lower or decrease in age. And it's like an hourglass. It always reaches the key point, which is barely legal. That's a term that every sex offender knows. Okay.
Yeah.
What I say is the regular sex offenders, how do you like that? You know, I've been too long in the field. When I call them regular sex offenders, they will stop and they will be shocked with themselves and they'll back out. Those that continue on do so because they want to. That's male deviance. And there's a desire to defile. That's what they're all about, and traumatize and have a negative lasting effect. That's what a pedophile is all about. So any so-called professional, and this is what Cantor is pushing. And so Stella has associated herself with Bailey and Cantor. Now let this sink in. James Cantor pushes the myth of non-offending pedophiles. He wants the P, pedophile, added to the LGBT growing alphabet. He wants it decriminalized. He wants civil rights protection for pedophiles. He downplays significantly the dangers of pornography, and he pushes pornography on his social media site. He believes there's nothing wrong with pornography and it should be pushed more. He was really pushing pornography during COVID shutdown. 100% of all sex offenders were deeply steeped in pornography. That is the underlying basis now of all sex offending. It supercharges.
Absolutely.
And it pushes pornography. He pushes sex dolls and sex bots and says there's nothing wrong with them. It
solidifies the connection between,
the deviance. It increases their desire. So it's like revving the engine at a stoplight.
Right.
That's all it's doing. Okay. He also is in favor of furries. And Cantor also wants the law of mandated reporting of if there's disclosure by a man that he's currently accessing child pornography. Cantor is against mandated reporting of that. So he doesn't want any mandated reporting of pornography. Stella has now associated her, and Michael Bailey affirms all of that Cantor pushes.
Why are women like this, though? Like, I feel like, men are the ones actually perpetrating a lot of this stuff. But I feel like behind every male perpetrator, there just seems like there's usually like a female.
So Stella has either become a Ghislaine Maxwell, or a useful idiot, or some sort of vicarious weird, it's like some of these women that are dominatrix.
Yeah, I think
Okay?
she's like somehow like gets excited by these guys.
There.
I've seen it. She
Okay.
gets like you can see it
And
the
I'll
way she
tell you what,
talks to them.
right? What do I think about female dominatrix? Okay. What do I think about Allison Mack? That was part of Nixium, that was recruiting women for Keith Raniere it was that sex cult that they branded in the growing area with Keith Raniere and Allison Mack. They branded using a cottering iron with no anesthesia. So that was
Wow.
back. That was only 10 years ago. Now he's doing life. So Allison Mack, part of Smallville, she was recruiting for that.
Right.
So you have these women that are either in it for the cash, they're in it for it's this weird, twisted alignment with the aggressor.
It's like women who get interested in dating men who are incarcerated. It's like all the women who send the
Kind of
fan
similar,
mail
right? A little bit different, but kind of similar.
these sadists and
Yeah,
stuff, and they're like,
yeah,
I could be the special one
yeah.
who who he connects with and sees
Right? They
the.
start
I don't
writing
know.
letters. They want to marry Ted Bundy, or they were
Right.
right.
I feel like there's that phenomenon. There's got to be a common thread in that
I think
phenomenon.
we could probably profile some of them. So the question is for Stella, what's your personality profile then? It's got to be one of these, because certainly, Stella, I'll direct this to you and the board of GenSpect. I don't even know if they have a board. I guess they do. Is this, why is it now that everybody that's raising concerns about safeguarding, you're silencing, and everybody that is either giving evidence of predatory behaviors or inclinations or fitting that profile based upon actual sex offender profile, or those that are promoting and defending pedophilia and real male sexual deviance that places women and children in harm's way and at risk, so a risk to society, you're platforming.
Right.
I've got huge concerns now about GenSpect. I wouldn't be a part, even if I was, but I just.
Yeah. No. It's like at this point,
anything you're doing.
and I don't know, you're obviously, I'm sure at this point aware of the WPath files and Schellenberger, Michael Schellenberger and Mia.
I've seen that. I haven't had a chance to read it, but
And so,
I'm familiar with a lot of the stuff she has done.
Yeah, Genevieve Gluck really like paved the way for a lot of that to really happen. And it's like, and they're sort of rushing over to GenSpect with it. And I guess Schellenberger is on the board of advisors for GenSpect. I'm grateful that he has some sort of like environmental organization that he technically released the files under. But he, they're going and they're doing all these interviews with GenSpect, and GenSpect all of a sudden is taking this very like toned down approach where they're saying that they're like really moving away from medicalization. And there's all these people who are like, oh, I believe in them. But she did say that she believes that there should be clinics for extreme body modification that adults should be able to access. I just see this now that I see them taking real steps to strike at WPath. These people end up somewhere. Like if you look at GenSpect is populated by a lot of these former therapists who used to push affirmation only. But I think
you're 100% correct.
When they saw that was a sinking ship, and it was eventually sinking ship, it's like now their overflow is and they're tweaking their
plausible deniability. It's their senses suddenly now they've awakened. They wake up and smell the coffee, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Now, Genevieve Gluck, and she and I've interacted a little bit behind the scenes. Nobody does a better job investigating reporting than Genevieve and RouXX. Okay, and what you understand, as a matter of fact, could you put that chart back up, because I want people to see the progression of deviance. And if you understand that, again, when you see wherever it starts with deviance, right? Where is my term?
Let's see.
Sorry, it's going to be right. I wrote this and I can't remember. It's right.
I see. So it is up here: impulsive and egocentric manipulation, coercion, power and control, domination, humiliation.
Oh, I'm sorry. Scroll up a little bit more. That's here we go. So again, the danger point is when it shifts to deviance, because the audience needs to understand this. When a man's mind becomes deviant, his soul, his mind, his everything about him, his appetites, everything about him is becoming twisted now. And aside from your title, Slightly Twisted Female, this is different for a male, okay?
Right.
Where it's like you take your shirt off inside out. He's no longer normal.
He's getting aroused by perpetrating harm, by seeing somebody in pain, in the negative effect. That's psychopathy. So once the guy's starting to move into that, he's now predatory. People need to understand he's not normal any longer. And what drives him, what starts to motivate him, what his appetites, his interest, his inclinations now are about having a negative effect. You overlay that with sex and sexuality. Now the stuff he's getting into, it's going to get worse. The age is moving downward. So the desire to have a negative effect, that's why he gets into bondage. They get into BDSM stuff. They get into the sissy porn, the humiliation. That is not love. That is not sex. They are getting off on the negative impact. Now think about that. That would be bad enough if it just stayed with adults. But what does this porn stuff do? It moves the age lower.
Right.
So by nature, the further a guy is getting into deviance and the further he's getting, he's probably looking more normal. Why? Because he's learning the art of how to win friends, influence people. He's becoming a sociopath, then a psychopath. So he's learning how to become more normal. He's learning the art of the deal. He's learning the art of the debate. He knows how to craft his argument and sell himself and cause people to question themselves as he's going after intuition. So by the time a guy is on the far right, he's accessing children. He's doing heinous things to children. He can traffic children. He's gaining access to children. And if you go all the way down, you will see then the deviant satisfaction and the harm that is done. So think about then the fully deviant male mind. What they get into ultimately is the harm, and then ultimately mutilation and snuff.
Yes.
And snuff for two reasons. They get off on seeing bloodletting, and it's the silence of the lambs. The trans movement is the medicalization and the mental manipulation, where you are going to be very effective at silencing the lambs, because if a trauma survivor who now is in a dissociative state, one of their parts comes out that's more male, doesn't want anything to do with the female part, goes through with this, is facilitated by financial and sexual predators. Now they get sterilized, and now they get their body parts amputated. You're pretty much assured, if you're a perpetrator and you caused that, they're never going to pin it on you.
Right.
And now in countries such as Canada, the Netherlands, they are allowing for physician-assisted suicide of the mentally ill.
Right.
It's the perfect predator protection program.
Right. Wow. And it's.
And as a matter of fact, scroll down a little further now. So I want you to see what these kind of people can do.
I just feel like we're at such a critical point that it's like, this is why I'm so focused on trying to show how the gender critical movement is being, like kneecapped, because we're at such a critical point now where people are finally starting to listen about all of the degeneracy that's been going on for years. And where we go here is so critical. And I already see us starting to circle back into what brought us here in the first place, that they're already, respinning it, and people are already buying into it again. It's like, guys, listen. We will end up exactly back where we just saved ourselves from if you do not pick up on some of these patterns. We need some pattern recognition here, people.
Well said. And look at under purpose and intent. Think about a guy that's getting deviant. What's he going to do in this day and age? He's accessing more and more horrific stuff. And look at what they're capable of doing. So once they finally get into the psychopathic end, their goal is to render defenseless and inflict trauma. How do you do that? And think about the age by that time. So you're certainly manipulating them. When you render defenseless, at first it's mental, then it's psychological, and then emotional. And then now think about sex trafficking. And now you're going to inflict trauma. Once you're doing that, what's the next step that's going to happen? Now you're going to overwhelm them. That's a good definition. Bessel van der Kolk, in his book, Body Keeps the Score, and Frank Anderson with IFS, they'll talk about the term overwhelm. So that's where, once somebody reaches that point, in terms of psyche, I will go into that shock phase, and then I become immobilized. So whether physically or certainly, meaning now Instead of fight, flight, now I'm immobilized. And now think about what a cult also wants to do. We also think about the Stockholm Syndrome. Stockholm Syndrome is not, by the way, traumatic bonding. The best way to understand that term, if you really want to help someone or help yourself go through healing, take the term trauma bonding and replace it with this term. It's half-baked healing. So it's that love-hate relationship, okay?
Yeah.
Then after that, and now think about the age. We're talking about kids at this stage. Now they're terrorizing them, and that's where the splitting of the mind happens. That's where you have dissociative identity disorder. And so my contention is this. A lot of the young people that are in the trans movement, the more severe cases that end up having their breast chopped off, you will see scars of prior self-injurious behavior. Yet
Right.
Gallagher, Dr. Gallagher, Frankenstein, that Nazi woman who has yachts, clearly cuts through scarring from self-injurious behavior, right? Because that is channeling off the rage and turning the anger inward. And then look at the next box: ensures compliance and then secure silence. So GenSpect now is focused on working with these kind of kids, yet they're doing what? They're allowing deviant males to come in that are cross-dressing, who are now, don't think that there aren't parts within somebody that has some dissociative identity disorder. The moment they see a deviant male come in, they get frozen. Now they get very compliant. Now they're going to say anything, and now you're going to traumatize them. So the real, and now Stella is connecting with Bailey and Canner. It's all about pedophilia, all about deviant sexuality, really stuff. And then justifying what? Sex dolls. They don't want a mandated reporting in a therapy session, that if a male tells me he's accessing child pornography, James Canner doesn't want me to have to tell the police about that. So they are becoming now the perfect predator protection organization, and that is filled with survivors.
Right.
It's a huge concern.
Right.
So anyways,
Right.
that's sort of the chart. That's how to use that.
That's excellent. Thank you. And we make this available. And so where can we find more of your work? Tell us about what sort of projects you're working on now and how we can, support and follow along with what you're doing.
I have a couple different websites. My primary website is called SurvivorSupport.net. So there's no space in between the words, just SurvivorSupport.net.
I'll make sure that I'll put all of this in the pinned comment. I'll make sure that John sends it to me afterwards, and I'll put it in the bio so that you guys have all these links too.
Okay. The reason why that website exists, the reason why I developed it first and foremost, were for my clients, to give them something to continue to prime the pump in between sessions. Earlier, prior to working in the prison system, as I was working with people full time, I would notice that in between session, because life happens, they get busy, the momentum starts to slow down. So I thought, I wish there was something that I could direct survivors to, so that they could keep journaling throughout the weeks and to help them clarify ultimately issues of responsibility and what happened and why. So the best way to use that site, so it's for survivors or anybody else that wants to help survivors to help understand it. So spouses, the best way to use it is work from left to right. You'll see under the Insights tab, you'll kind of see the evolution of that. The first 6 or 7 drop-down tabs was really what I originally intended to put in there for survivors, because it stopped at dysfunctional or toxic families. But then I started to think, wait a second.
I'm sorry, what is the URL for that?
It's SurvivorSupport.net.
Survivor Support. I can pull that up while we're talking about it.
And so under the Insights tab, you will then see I start to give profiles of different kinds of manipulators and sociopaths and psychopaths. And then I add stuff about the trans movement. Because again, so there you go. So the best way to use it, go from left to right. It also features, there's a little link, sorry, is to my Friday night podcast. I deal actually with counseling topics on TECN.TV on Friday nights. Under the podcast tab, there you go. That's a repository. I'm doing a series. It's going to probably be about 75 hours worth on the topic of forgiveness. So if you want to know the truth about forgiveness, what it is versus what it is not, and emphasize what it is not, because unfortunately there's been a great distortion of what forgiveness is, and it's harming survivors. So each of those episodes are about an hour. I think I'm up to almost 40 there. And if you scroll down far enough, you'll see I've been working on, and we'll go back to pick up where I left off, 2 years worth of the topic of boundaries. So it's really good counseling information there. So SurvivorSupport.net is made for survivors and those that want to better understand how to help them. So that's SurvivorSupport.net.
Great.
I then have a more research-oriented site. Okay, there you go. So on boundaries. So you can see how there was a change in that background. So that is all. I did do sort of a question and answer on sex offenders there. I have one episode that I did there, but the rest is dealing with some of the most fundamental or primary of counseling issues. So people can access right there.
Great. Awesome.
I recommend that.
How to discern a difficult person from a selfish.
There we go. So
excellent topic. We need that.
Okay, so the next website is churchprotect.org. That's all scrunched together, no space between the words. So churchprotect.org. This was actually my first site, because when I was getting close to retirement from the Department of Corrections, because I was learning about how predators, the most sophisticated ones, target churches. I do have a ministry background a long time ago. Well, we had never been taught about predators, right? Predator protection is, stranger danger. Well, that's not the predators, right? That's a small percentage of them. So the most sophisticated predators target churches. And so this was really my training site. So if you under myths and truths, and under truth, I also have added a lot of my clinical work and feedback that I got from the highest levels of the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. So the feel of Church Protect, and what I use that for, is not only a repository for my screenshots from social media, so the Insights tab has that, but to help. Yeah, so the stuff that I do on Twitter and the debates and other things, so I screen grab those, put them there. I call them bite-sized curriculum. So you can see I'm a little bit far behind, but if you scroll down, you'll see different things, a lot from Twitter.
Awesome.
So some of the videos.
This is great.
So there you go. Right, because I know at any point in time I'm going to get kicked off of Twitter again. So I figure.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's actually great. It's great because also things move so quickly. And I've also noticed, I don't know if you've noticed on Twitter, but the search is not complete. Like when I'm sometimes I'll be searching through, and I know that there was a tweet that happened at some point a long time ago, and I'll be searching with keywords that I know exist in that tweet, and Twitter won't pull them up. Like they're definitely making it so it's harder and harder to access stuff. So it's really good that we continue to document this stuff, because it is so easy for history to repeat itself, and we need to really inoculate ourselves against that.
So churchprotect.org, that's more of a training site. And then I have Unmasking the Trans Movement. So again, no space in between those. There's the site, so unmaskingthetransmovement.org, and the same on YouTube.
So Unmasking the Transmit.
Unmasking the Trans Movement. Long title, but I specifically purposely called it.
Unmasking. Is it .org?
Yeah, Unmasking the Trans Movement. .org. Yeah, I'm sorry, .org.
Let's see, unmasking. But I don't think I spelled it wrong.
Yeah, I know, because it's so long. I know, but I figured my goal is I want to unmask the trans movement. So I figured, what are we going to call this? So we'll call it Unmasking the Trans Movement. We had to take a break for a while. Brad and I and Dr. Ann Gillies were 100% volunteer. Brad has a 40-year media background. He recently had a severe heart attack, so he had to slow down for a few months. He's a great guy. His daughter started to get sucked into this, so he has a lot of interest in this. He's from Canada. So
is this it?
There you go. So
it's actually .com. I got it under .com. Unmasking the Trans Movement.
.org. Sorry. Yeah, I've got SurvivorSupport.net, churchprotect.org, and then
Yeah.
unmaskingmovement.com.
Oh, that's great.
Okay,
These are great.
so you'll see the episodes. Those I try to put them up on. I think they're on BitChute as well and on YouTube. Okay, so it's these are really good 30-minute episodes of good clinical experts and those that have been impacted by it. Laura Becker's interviews up here.
Interesting. I definitely want to check that out.
Kirilova, her interview is up there. So you can see if we treated her properly. And, you know, it was really to help her tell her story.
Yeah.
So these are really important. You know, we probably, Brad and I probably need to get these up to speed. So the most recent are on the YouTube channel. So we meet with doctors, we meet with therapists. So if you want to really get educated on what the concerns are about the trans movement, especially from a clinical perspective, that is a resource. The third, or I guess the fourth thing, is my blog. That is SurvivorSupport.us. I haven't been able to add to it in a while just because I've been so busy, but the blog posts are really good in my estimation. We've got a couple dealing with the trans movement, but then a lot about predators, okay, about profiles of sexual predators. What are the indicators that a guy is a sexual predator? Kind of one and the same, but a lot of different information about predators. So that's survivorsupport.us.
Trying to pull that one up.
That's my blog.
So
again, these are all just for public service, just education.
Yeah.
We don't have any mutual, you know, I never monetize anything I do. I probably should, but no, I just want to get it out there.
You know, I always try to make sure to, you know, bring that up to people because I feel like
I just
plug themselves.
Yeah, that's good. And then, but the Friday night one, that's a really nice break for me because then I can forget about all this stuff and just speak to survivors or those that have been hurt. And that's why 2.5 years worth of programs on the issue of boundaries. I'm going to come back to that. But then while I was dealing with that subject, of course, I have to talk about, or at some point in time, when you put boundaries up, right, somebody's going to say, well, you're not being very nice. You're not being very forgiving. So I thought it's high time. I have to deal with that topic. So I'm being very methodical. There will be a total of somewhere between 50 and 70 episodes. I'm going to turn it into a book. I'm going to be so bold as to say it's going to be the final answer on what forgiveness is versus is not. And I'll give you a hint. You don't have to forgive someone who is not sorry. Okay, bottom line. And I prove it. And so spend your time very methodically because that myth is pushed in churches, in counseling offices. And I've been called heretics now by pastors, but I noticed no pastors. The more parts, I just published episode 28. Okay, there's going to be a total, I'm thinking probably now about 70. I've got about 15 yet to put up in post-production. I'm just really unpacking it just item by item because people have to be, we have to dispel this myth that's doing such damage on the wounded and is really setting perps free to continue to harm. And
it's you know, forgiving somebody is not letting your boundaries down to them. It's not welcoming them back in. You're giving them space again.
So any survivor, I would strongly recommend give yourself permission to just start to go, you know, podcast by podcast and listen to that.
Awesome. Excellent. Great. Thank you. Thank you. So, I mean, this was phenomenal. Really one of the most, I feel like, electrocharged interviews I've had. You are so interesting to listen to, and I think such a critical resource, and just your experience and the way that you're able to cut straight through the bullshit. And I think the number one kind of takeaway from all of this for me is, like I said, is that a pervert's a pervert. You don't need to over intellectualize it, you know, and we need to maintain our strong boundaries.
That's right. Brittany, as you've said and others, that what's happening is, you know, the term gaslighting, okay, that actually comes from a movie.
Right?
If you really want to see gaslighting. But yeah, anytime somebody is suggesting that you not be as on point. Now, of course, we all can be maybe overly, but okay, that's right. For instance, like myself, right? I could get to a point where I'm now jaded. I don't want to be jaded. That's not the goal. I don't want to see every guy as a perpetrator. But the reality is this, there are perpetrators. So we want to be reasonably cautious. We want to raise the bar on safeguarding, Never lower it. But if anybody's trying to tell a woman that she's being overly sensitive, when it comes to male deviance, when it comes to a man, no, what's happening is you are being gaslit. So any organization, any group that is not first and foremost focused on ensuring the health, safety, and welfare of women and children, which means no men in women's prisons, no men in women's sports, no men in women's private spaces. All deviant men should be doing their deviant thing elsewhere. They don't need to access kids. You go back in the strip clubs, or you go back in the clubs and do your deviant stuff with
There's spaces. There are always
over there,
adult spaces for it.
And Brittany, you nailed it. What the perps, what the predators, the predator apologists, they all saw the perfect opportunity, because this was such a shock to the system, because they understand the big lie theory, cults, manipulators, predators, perpetrators, all that. They know that if, and you said it recently, one of your in your episodes, where they pushed the bar out. Now they want us to meet halfway. Right. So they do the big lie theory, which is such a big whopping lie that it pushes you back on your heels, causes you to question yourself. There's your intuition, right? It's dumbing down the intuition so that they now have gained ground. You never want to give a deviant man any kind of ground, right? The only ground they get is behind prison walls. Okay, quite frankly, or in a male.
They'll just keep taking more and more and more.
That's what it is. So this has been the greatest scam, scheme, and ruse by financial predators. So the umbrella trans movement, right? Financial predators and sexual predators are loving this. And now it's emboldened. And so in that Trojan horse, the trans movement is the Trojan horse. The very last ones to come out are the pedophiles.
Yes.
Because everybody else did the heavy lifting.
Right.
So
now,
the pedophiles and the pedophile apologists.
Well, and it's like, again, it's like, rather than starting where you have to do this whole leap, you take another step, and then by the time you're there, just one more little step and you're at the P.
And who's GenSpect now associating themselves with? Pro pedophile apologists and deviant sexologists that are really heinous. And
people have been calling this out for a long time, and they've been spun as being hysterical.
They're letting deviant guys strut their stuff in their conferences. Right. It's a safeguarding. We're crazy, and we're puritanical, and we're the ultras, and so many names. You know what? You host, and any one of them, if you're okay with it, Brittany will use your platform to hold a discussion. They can come on. I'll discuss this with them anytime.
I love it. Thank you so much, John. What a phenomenal afternoon with you. I really appreciate you taking your time to talk to us. Everybody, I'll have all of John's links if you want to continue to follow along with his work. And like we said, it's an open invitation. So if any of you guys want to take that invitation and pose it to anybody that you think would be a good candidate, please do. And like I said, I have an open platform, and John, I'd love to have you back anytime. So let's definitely stay in touch.
Well, Brittany, thank you for your work. You always make me laugh. I listen to your programs a lot, and so you do a good job.
Thank you. Really. Thank you. So. Thank you so much. Thanks for everything. All right, everybody. Thank you again, and don't forget to like the stream if you haven't already, and go ahead and wait, John. One last thing. What is your Twitter handle? It's _Uhler, or it's at.
I think it's
I'll put all the links up. Don't worry.
It's just John K. Uhler LPC, I think. But then again, I don't know.
Yeah, we'll get it. We'll get it.
Know this.
Excellent. All right, guys. I love you all. Thank you so much, John. Thank you so much. You were phenomenal. Appreciate it. Take care. See you next time. Bye everyone.